CDH Films presents an animated film done with Legos, The Sea of Monsters, Book 2 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, from the original novel by Rick Riordan. 12-year-old New Yorker Percy Jackson had quite an adventurous summer 1 year ago when he learned he was a descendant of the Greek god Poseidon, and also set out on a quest to uncover Zeus's stolen lightning bolt, along with his best friend Grover Underwood, who was really a satyr, and his other new friend Annabeth Chase, who was a descendant of Athena. And now, 1 year later, Percy was now 13 and had just one more day before finishing the school year. After that, he would be off to the awesome summer camp he had gone to called Camp Half-Blood. It was a camp where offsprings of Greek gods like Percy would go to be trained to become great heroes. It was also technically the only sanctuary for people like them due to the Earth's population of Greek monsters running around. Of course, no mortals would see them due to the magical force called the Mist, which deceived them from seeing any monsters or magical activity at all. The night before the last day of school, Percy, for some reason, had a dream of Grover being chased by a monster through some beach town. Maybe it was Florida. It wasn't all that clear to see what was chasing him, but as Percy watched Grover reach a bridal store, he heard a deep voice that said, "Mine!" Before he could catch what happened next, Percy woke up from the call of breakfast. Percy wondered, even if he was just dreaming it, could it have actually been happening? He remembered how he had dreams of other things that really happened around the first time he learned he was a demigod. He told his mom, Sally, about the dream during breakfast. "I wouldn't worry about it, dear," she said. "Grover's a big satyr now. If there had been any trouble, I'm sure we would have heard from camp." Then she mentioned she was notified by Chiron, the one in charge of the camp's activities, and was told that it might not be safe to go to the camp because there's been trouble. When Percy heard that, he panicked and flooded with questions. Before Sally could answer, the clock struck 7:30 a.m. "You better hurry," Sally said. "You don't want to keep Tyson waiting." Percy knew she was right. He knew if Tyson ended up going to school without him, he'd be pretty upset. Tyson was this tall, overweight homeless kid who was found living in a box in an alley on 72nd Street. His voice was deep, but he talked like a little kid, and he acted like one too, probably because he had never been to school and no one ever took care of him. As far as Percy and Sally knew, Tyson had been abandoned when he was younger. If it wasn't for Sally's concern, he probably wouldn't have gotten too far in life. The social workers tried everything, but it seemed most likely that Tyson didn't exist. The school he and Percy went to, Merriweather Prep, had adopted him as a community service project to show students could feel good about themselves, but Tyson always went back to his box on 72nd Street. And unfortunately, everyone kept picking on him as soon as they learned he was a softie. Percy was his only friend, and Tyson was Percy's only friend. Later that day in gym class, the class got ready for dodgeball. The school bully, Matt Sloan, had his own group of goons on his team while Percy and Tyson were teamed up with a bunch of other outcasts who all got harassed by Sloan. "You're going down, Jackson," he said. "Scared," Tyson said to Percy. "Smell funny." "What?" Percy asked. "Them," Tyson said, pointing to Sloan's team. The funny thing they noticed about the guys on Sloan's team, Percy swore he never seen them before. When the game started, Percy was smacked in the gut with a dodgeball faster than he could even see it coming. It felt so hard, like a bowling ball zooming at the speed of sound. "Hey, you could have killed somebody," Percy yelled. "I hope so, Perseus Jackson," said one of the opponents. "I hope so." Now that part right there was not right. Nobody called Percy by his full name. Nobody who was human, that is. Percy knew without even having to guess that the enemy players were monsters in disguise. Everyone on the enemy team except Matt Sloan were all big, bad, ugly giants. Of course, Sloane was deceived by the mist to think they were still human boys, so he wasn't aware of anything. The same went for every other human in the room. And the coach was too distracted to even listen. The giant held up another dodgeball, which now looked like a huge cannonball on fire. He aimed and threw it at Percy, but Tyson caught it with his hand. Percy couldn't figure out how he was able to do that with his bare human hand, but at least he was saved. Percy had to get out of there before he got killed. He could have used Riptide, the sword he had, but it was in his other pants in his locker room in the men's room, and the door was locked. Then he had an idea. He ran and stood in front of the door to the locker room. Then he waited and jumped out of the way as a burning cannonball blew up the door. Percy raced to his locker, pulled out his jeans, and took out Riptide. Riptide was English for Anaklusmos, which was a pen that magically transformed into a sword once uncapping it. The pen is mightier than the sword. Another giant got closer, but before Percy could make his move, the giant got stabbed from behind. It was Annabeth. Boy, was Percy glad to see her. She pointed to Tyson and said to bring him along, then meet her outside. Not to mention she gave Tyson a disturbed look when she looked at him. Then she put on her magic baseball cap and disappeared. When they got outside, Annabeth told Percy she had been chased by monsters since reaching Virginia and had dreams about the camp being in danger. Percy told her about his dream about Grover. Then Tyson raised up his hand and asked what was going on. After saving his life, Percy figured he deserved an explanation. So he told him those guys back there were giants, and the fact that the Greek gods still exist and now living in the USA, and he and Annabeth were demigods. Annabeth mentioned the giants were called Laestrygonians. For some reason, Tyson didn't really act too surprised. Then they went to the sidewalk and Annabeth took out an ancient Greek coin called a drachma and dropped it in the concrete. Instead of bouncing on the ground, it sunk right down like quicksand. Then she shouted something in a different language like she was casting a spell or summoning something. Sitai Oharma Diabolis. And somehow, Percy was able to understand it. She had said, "Stop, chariot of damnation," in ancient Greek. 1 second later, in the spot where the coin fell, the concrete started melting and red liquid started boiling. Then a car erupted from the ooze. It was a taxi cab painted smoke gray. "I can't just leave Tyson," said Percy. "Fine, bring him along," Annabeth said, like she was getting annoyed. When they crawled into the back seat, they noticed in the front there was not one cabbie, but 3 cabbies. More specifically, 3 very old ladies in matching cloaks. And Percy recognized them from last summer. The 3 Fates. Yep, the 3 old ladies who all had empty eye sockets and all shared one single green eye and could see people's destiny. Clotho, Atropos, and Lachesis. But now they called themselves Wasp, Anger, and Tempest. They hit the gas and drove super fast. "Gonna be sick," Tyson said. "Don't worry," said Annabeth. "The Grey Sisters know what they're doing. They're very wise." "Oh yes, wise," Anger said. "We know everything. The city, the Nepal capital, the location you seek." "What location?" Percy asked. "No, don't tell him," said Tempest. "Remember what happened last time? How we ended up losing the eye?" "That reminds me. Give it here," said Wasp. "But you had it yesterday," Anger complained. "Well, I'm driving," said Wasp. All 3 of them started fighting over the eye. Then they dropped it and it fell in front of Percy. "We can't see," they said. "Give us the eye." "Not until you tell me about the location," Percy said. "All right," said Anger. 30, 31, 75, 12. Just remember those exact numbers in that exact order. That's all we can tell you. Suddenly the cab squealed to a halt. They were somewhere in the countryside of Long Island. They had reached their stop. The trio climbed out of the car, Percy gave the fates back their eye, and they zoomed away without even waiting to get paid. Up on the hill the kids could see why. There was a battle between some of the campers and two big mechanical bronze bulls, about twice the size as normal bulls, with surfaces made of bronze and also metal horns and shiny red eyes made of rubies. Those are Hephaestus's Colchis bulls, Annabeth had mentioned. Just when you thought a single minotaur was bad enough. The group of campers fighting the bulls were led by the camp bully, Clarice LaRue, daughter of Ares. "Hold the line!" she shouted, although most of the campers were already getting fried. The most surprising thing was that the bulls managed to pass the pine tree and reach the other side of the hill. That shouldn't have happened because there was like a force field covering the camp to keep monsters from entering. "I'm going in," said Percy, raising his sword. "Tyson, stay here," he told him. "I don't want you getting hurt." "But Percy," said Annabeth, "he just got lucky with the giants. He's immortal," Percy said. He managed to swing his sword at the first bull, but it kept running and it turned back again at Percy. No way could Percy crawl out of its path, and for such a huge thing, it could really move super fast. "Tyson, help him!" Annabeth shouted. "Can't get through," he said. "I, Annabeth Chase, allow you to enter the camp." 1 second, thunder shook. The next, Tyson was walking past the edge of the shield. "Percy needs help," he shouted as he ran between Percy and the bull. "Tyson, no!" Percy shouted, but it was too late. The bull opened its mouth and blew a blast of fire at Tyson. Just when Percy thought his friend was fried to ashes, when the flames died, Tyson was still standing there in one piece. Not even his filthy clothes looked any worse. The next surprise was that Tyson was able to punch the bull in the face and send it flying. "Bad cow," Tyson yelled. Then he gave that cow another pow and sent that cow down to the ground. The bull was down and defeated. Percy looked over at Tyson. "You didn't die," he said to him. "Percy, have you ever actually looked at Tyson, like, closely in the face?" Annabeth asked. "Take a closer look at him," she said. "Look real carefully." It must have been usually hard for Percy to look at Tyson directly in the face, probably because he was so much higher than most people he knew. It was either that, or he just couldn't stand the usual look of peanut butter in his teeth. He stared at him for 1 second, then the next second, the image seemed to change to what looked like a single eye right in the middle of Tyson's face. Tyson was really a Cyclops, and the mist was disguising him to look human. That would explain why he didn't burn up. "There's lots of them in all the big cities," said Annabeth. "They're always getting abandoned and growing up wildly on the streets. However, you found him. We should take him to Chiron. He'll know what to do." Percy couldn't figure out how the mist was so strong to trick him from realizing what Tyson really was that whole time. But he didn't have time to worry about it. They had to help the other campers. While they were busy with the first bull, Clarice and the other campers had already taken care of the second bull. See the good that comes out of teamwork? They walked over to Clarice. "We have to tell Tantalus what happened," she said. "Tantalus?" Percy asked. "The activities director?" she said impatiently. "No, that's Chiron's job," Percy said. "And what about Argus? As head of security here, shouldn't he have been here?" "Argus got fired," she told him. "You've been away too long. Things have changed." "But Chiron's been at this job forever," Percy said. "What happened?" "That happened," Clarice said, pointing to the pine tree. The leaves were yellow, and some green ooze poured out from the trunk. That would explain Annabeth's dreams of the camp being in danger. And the dreams were true. Everyone was in danger because what was keeping them safe was failing. That tree was what was creating the magic borders that kept the monsters out, and now it had been poisoned and was slowly dying. Percy remembered the story he was told about that tree the first time he visited camp a year ago. About 6 years earlier, when Annabeth had traveled to camp herself for the first time, she had been traveling with two other demigods. One of them was Luke Castellan, son of Hermes, and the other, Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus. When they reached the hill, Thalia sacrificed herself to distract a monster. Then Zeus decided to spare her and transform her into a pine tree. And the tree projected a magic shield over the camp to keep the monsters out and to keep all the demigods safe, and it had been that way ever since. Now that the tree was dying, the shield would die with it. So what could they do? When they started looking around more at the campgrounds, they noticed the place didn't change much since last summer. The blue house didn't change much, or the arena, the armory, the beach, the woods, the rock-climbing wall with lava pouring out of the side, or even the 12 cabins that each represented the 12 Olympian gods. The only thing that wasn't right was that some of the grass was turning yellow, and there were some fire marks around the place. Somebody had messed with Percy's favorite place in the world, and he wasn't happy at all. They went into the blue house and found a middle-aged centaur packing bags. Chiron, the trainer of heroes. Percy had met him a while back. Back before he learned he was a demigod, Chiron had posed as his Latin teacher and magically disguised himself as a handicap in a wheelchair. Long story. "Percy, my goodness, you've grown," he said. "Clarice said you got fired," Percy said. Chiron explained to him that he had to take the blame of what happened to the tree only because he failed to prevent the poison and couldn't even cure it. "How did the tree get poison exactly?" Percy asked. "It's a venom even I've never seen before," said Chiron. "Possibly something from a monster from quite deep in the pits of Tartarus." "Then we know who it is," said Percy. "It's "Do not invoke the Titan Lord's name," said Chiron, "especially while what we're dealing with here and now." "But don't you remember what happened last year?" Percy asked. "I'll bet Luke's trying to help him again." "Perhaps, but the tree has only a few weeks left, and the whole camp itself is dying," Chiron said. "The only source of magic that would reverse it is something that was lost centuries ago." "Well, what is it? Let's go find it," Percy said. Chiron put his hand on Percy's shoulder. "Percy, you must promise me you will not act rashly," he said. "I told your mother it wasn't safe to come here, but now that you are here, you should stay and not leave." "But why? I want to help," Percy said. "I can't just sit here and do nothing." "We can't risk you falling into any traps the Titan Lord may have for you." It was true. Percy remembered last year his quest to seek the Master Bolt was all because Kronos controlled Luke Castellan to steal it. And Luke tried to kill Percy afterwards. You would have thought Kronos had learned a lot from being trapped in Tartarus all that time. But since he was immortal, he would never rest to get revenge. But it had to be Kronos. No one else would be that low just to poison Thalia's tree. Of course, Kronos couldn't act on his own, but he was good at connecting with and twisting people's minds to do his dirty work like he did with Luke. He was even able to get hold of Ares, the war god. "I'll send a message to your mother that you are safe, Percy," said Chiron. "And remember this, you are in danger, and don't think the Titan Lord has forgotten you." With that, he walked out of the room, leaving the house and leaving the camp. "Don't go, pony," Tyson said sadly. Percy had just realized he didn't tell him about Grover, but now it was too late. The best teacher Percy had ever had was now gone, maybe even for good. So the trio went back outside to join the other campers for dinner. It was hard to believe how the day went by so quickly to already be dinner time. There were 12 tables the same way there were 12 cabins. The campers were organized by whichever god was their parent. Some of the same people were still there, and Percy had recognized some of them from last summer. The kids from Cabin 6, which represented Athena, where Annabeth belonged, all had blonde hair and gray eyes, just like her. She wasn't the oldest, but she was the one camper that had been at Camp Half-Blood longer than anyone else. Or anyone else that survived, that is. How can you tell? Because she was the only one who received the most clay beads on her leather necklace. Just about every camper had some. Every new bead showed that that camper survived a whole other summer. Each one had a picture painted on it that represented a great event that camper had experienced during that particular year. Last year she had 5, now she had 6, along with a college ring from her mortal father added to it. If anyone didn't stay any longer, they would have either left and lived their lives, or they might have died in combat. The Hermes cabin was the most crowded, but not all the kids who stayed there were Hermes kids. Because Hermes was a god of travelers, he didn't mind taking in other demigods until they were claimed. Percy spent his first few days in that cabin last year until he was claimed by Poseidon. Luke Castellan had been the cabin's head counselor, at least until last year's incident, and he ran away. The ones leading it now were 2 boys named Travis and Connor Stoll, who were not twins, but still biologically related. They were both tall, had brown hair, and had that same elfish look all of Hermes kids had. The Hephaestus cabin was led by an African-American boy named Charles Beckendorf. He was 15, tall, a real nice guy, and could make just about anything you name with any piece of metal. Everyone just kept calling him Beckendorf. Nobody ever called him Charles or Charlie or Chuck. The Aphrodite cabin was filled with a bunch of girls who all looked so good you would have thought they were supermodels. The cabin was led by a girl named Selena Beauregard. She had dark hair, blue eyes, was slim, very cute, and much nicer than the others. The Ares cabin had a lot of kids who all chose to be bullies, and was led by Clarice. Not to mention someone stuck a sign on her back that said, "You moo, girl," and no one said anything. The Apollo cabin wasn't much, or the Dionysus cabin, or even the Demeter cabin. As far as anyone knew, Zeus didn't have any kids since Thalia Grace's little accident, and there were no children in the Hera cabin, or the Artemis cabin, because, well, long story. As for the Poseidon table, Percy was the only one there. Reasons for that was because, truthfully, Percy was born by mistake. During the World War II, his father made a promise with his brothers, Zeus and Hades, which he and Zeus had already broken, to never have children again. That was because children of the Big Three are a lot more powerful than other demigods, and could cause a lot more danger. Which explained Thalia Grace's little accident, and one of the biggest reasons why Kronos was after Percy. "Who invited that?" said one of the Apollo kids. Lucky for them, Percy didn't catch who said it. Then Percy's attention was caught by a familiar voice from the head table. "Well, if it isn't Peter Johnson." It was the camp's director, Dionysus, the god of wine. Or as the campers called him, Mr. D. Mr. D was grounded by his father Zeus for chasing wood nymphs, so he was made the camp's director until otherwise. "It's Percy Jackson, sir," said Percy. "As they say these days, whatever," said Mr. D. Next to him was a pale-faced man Percy had never seen before, with messy gray hair, and he looked kind of miserable and hungry. He was dressed in an orange prisoner's jumpsuit with a number 0001. Tantalus, Chiron's replacement. "This is Poseidon's child," Mr. D told him. "You'll need to watch him." "Well, Perseus Jackson," said Tantalus, "I do expect you to refrain yourself from causing any more trouble." "Trouble?" Percy asked. Mr. D snapped his fingers and a newspaper appeared on the table. Percy saw his yearbook picture on the front page. His dyslexia made it hard for him to read, but he guessed that they reported and accused him of being responsible for the gym at his school getting torched. Yes, trouble, said Tantalus. I understand you caused plenty last summer. Percy didn't argue, but he did go through a lot to survive his quest last summer. The mist did eventually pay off, and it turned out okay in the end. However, Tantalus missed that part. Then Percy looked at him again and thought for a moment. You're from the Fields of Punishment, the guy that stands under the fruit tree who can't eat or drink, Percy said. Tantalus's eyes narrowed. I'll be watching you, Percy Jackson, he told him. I don't want any problems in my camp. Your camp has problems already, sir, Percy said. Oh, go sit down, Johnson, said Mr. D. Come on, Tyson, Percy said. Oh, no, said Tantalus. The monster stays here until we decide what to do with it. His name is Tyson, Percy snapped, and he saved the camp. If it weren't for him, the whole place would be fried. Yes, quite a pity that would have been, said Mr. D. Leave us, Tantalus ordered, while we decide this creature's fate. I'll be right over there, big guy, and don't worry, we'll find you a good place to sleep tonight, Percy said to Tyson. I believe you, said Tyson. You're my friend. Percy went back to his table and couldn't believe how the day went. He almost got killed twice, ended the school year with not as much disaster as the camp was facing, and Chiron told him to do nothing about it. When he finished his pizza, he threw away the remains in a burning bronze brazier. Oh, Poseidon, please accept my offering, and send some help while you're at it, he prayed silently. Then he noticed the smell of the fire changed to what smelled like a breeze of seawater. It was hard to tell if that meant Poseidon was listening, but Percy just went back to his seat. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, a satyr blew a horn to get everyone's attention on Tantalus. Yes, well, Tantalus said as soon as the talking died down, on my first day of authority, it is quite a pleasant form of punishment to be here. I do hope to interact with everyone here. You all look good enough to eat. As for some changes, we made some reinstitutions for chariot racing. I know these races were discontinued for various reasons, but I know you will all join me in welcoming this camp tradition. The first race shall start in 3 days' time, and teams may register in the morning. We'll release you from your regular activities to prepare your chariots and choose your horses. Also, winning teams shall be awarded no chores for that month. It was hard to believe, but a roar of excitement filled most of the tables. Then Clarice, the last person Percy expected to object, stood up. But what about patrol duty? She asked. What about the situation with the tree's borders? But then her siblings pulled her back down into her seat before she could finish. And now, Tantalus continued, before we move on to the campfire, some of you may have noticed we have a Cyclops here thanks to Percy Jackson and Annabeth Chase. And of course, Cyclopes are known for being bloodthirsty monsters and have a very small brain capacity. Under normal circumstances, I would release it into the woods so you all can hunt it down for the fun of it, but who knows? Perhaps this one is not as horrible as its brethren. Although it was technically already too late, Percy felt so angry, he felt like killing Tantalus. And until it proves itself worthy of destruction, Tantalus continued, we'll need a place to keep it. The Hermes cabin, perhaps? The Hermes cabin became silent. Come now, said Tantalus, any suggestions at all? Then without warning, the last thing Percy could expect just happened. Everyone gasped. Tantalus scooted away from Tyson in surprise. Percy couldn't believe what he was seeing, but it was about to change his life. Floating over Tyson's head was a glowing green light in the shape of a trident. Tyson was a son of Poseidon, which meant He was Percy's half-brother. Well, I guess we know where to put the beast now. Now I can see the resemblance. Everyone else followed Tantalus and started laughing except Annabeth and a few other friends. Lucky for Tyson, he was too innocent to understand they were making fun of him. He was too distracted from waving at the glowing symbol anyway. The rest of the time was just as Tantalus wanted. Torture. Percy went instantly from the new cool kid who returned Zeus's Master Bolt to the loser with the monster for a brother. As much as he liked Tyson, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Okay, ashamed. Everyone kept teasing him. The Aphrodite girls offered him eyeliner. He's not my brother, Percy complained. He's my half-brother. But no one had the maturity to listen. Annabeth wanted to make him feel better and wanted to suggest they could team up together in the chariot race. It seemed like a good combo since her mom invented chariots and his dad invented horses. Just ignore them, Percy, she said. It's not your fault you have a monster for a brother. Half-brother, and he's not a monster, Percy snapped. Okay, but technically he is a monster, Annabeth said. Well, you let him in the camp. To save your life, I didn't really expect Poseidon to claim him, and Cyclopes are usually vicious. Well, he's not, and what do you got against him anyway? She blushed. That made Percy have the feeling there was something she wasn't telling him. You're treating him like he's something horrible, he said. Well, then maybe you should go team up with him instead. Okay, fine, I will. So they stormed away from each other, but Percy only felt even worse than before. For the next few days, Percy did whatever he could to keep his mind off his problems. Selena Beauregard gave him his first flying lesson on a Pegasus. As the son of the sea god, Percy never felt good being high up in the air, but it felt right on the Pegasus. Probably because his dad invented horses. The only one who didn't have a problem with Tyson was Beckendorf. Beckendorf said his father, Hephaestus, had worked with Cyclopes and suggested forging to Tyson. He said he could make Tyson a pro in no time. Although Tantalus dismissed everyone from guard duty, the campers made up a schedule for taking turns watching the tree, and Percy did his part. Satyrs and tree spirits tried singing and playing music to it magically, but it wasn't enough. The night before the first chariot race, Percy had another dream about Grover. This time, Grover was in a dark cave trying to block the entrance to another cavern with a boulder. And for some reason, he was wearing a wedding dress. Then he was looking straight at Percy. The image was like seeing something on TV. Percy, thank the gods, he said. Can you hear me? I can hear you, Percy answered. What's going on? Hottie pie, a deep voice shouted from behind the boulder. Are you finished yet? Not yet, dear. Just 12 more days, Grover said. Percy, please, I don't have much time. You have to help me. Why? Percy asked. What's going on? Where are you? I don't know, Grover said. It's on an island somewhere in the Sea of Monsters. The monster that kidnapped me is a shepherd, and he used it as a trap. He has it. It had so much nature magic on it, it smelled just like the great god Pan, and he tricked me with it. This is why no satyr returns from the quest for Pan. Why are you wearing a dress? Percy asked. It's the only thing keeping me alive. Luckily for me, he's half blind from the last time somebody poked it out. Who's he? Percy asked. Polyhemus, the Cyclops. He thinks I'm a lady Cyclops and now he wants to marry me. You gotta get me out of here before he realizes what I really am and eats me. Where's the island? Percy asked. I'll come and rescue you. I told you I don't know where exactly, but it's somewhere in the Sea of Monsters, Grover said. Wait, you said he has it? Percy asked. What's it? Honey pie, Polyhemus called. Gotta go, Grover said. Sweet dreams, don't let me die. Then Percy woke up. It was morning, and the day of the first chariot race. It was hot and humid that morning, and all the participants prepared their chariots. The racetrack led in and out of the woods, and spectators sat real close to the track. Mr. D wasn't a morning person, so he didn't show up. Percy did in fact team up with Tyson, and after spending time in the forging, he did a real good job. "We're gonna win," Tyson said cheerfully. "We're so gonna lose," Percy thought to himself. But he knew he had to try. He wasn't quite sure for what reason, but it was either to show Tyson wasn't such a bad guy, or to show that he wasn't ashamed of being seen with Tyson in public, or that he wasn't hurt by any jokes or insults. "All right," said Tantalus. "You all know the rules. Each team has 2 in each chariot, the driver and the defender. The first chariot to make it twice around the track wins. Weapons are allowed, but please, nobody try to kill anybody. The punishment for killing anyone will be no s'mores at the campfire for a week. Now ready your chariots." As everyone got ready, Percy tried to tell Annabeth about Grover, but she was still too angry to listen. Then a horn blew. "Charioteers, to your marks," Tantalus called. As soon as all chariots were lined up, the starting signal dropped. The chariots roared to life, zoomed down the track, and disappeared into the woods. After the first 20 feet, Percy and Tyson managed to make it past the Ares chariot, but Annabeth was still way ahead. "Birds!" Tyson shouted. Percy looked behind him and saw what Tyson was worried about. They were being chased by... pigeons? Nope, not ordinary pigeons. These had bronze beaks, shiny eyes, really sharp feathers, and made a sound like screeching metal. They were swarming through the woods, but it was about to get worse. When they made it out of the woods and back to the starting point and they finished the first lap, the birds started to attack the campers. "Synthalian birds," Annabeth shouted. "They'll strip everyone to bones if we don't drive them away. But how?" Percy remembered a story about Hercules fighting those birds by making horrible sounds. That's when it struck him. "To the big house!" Then Annabeth jumped from her chariot to Percy's like it was the easiest thing in the world. Clarice's chariot crossed the finish line and won first place, while Percy drove his chariot off the track and towards the big house. When Percy got inside, he found Chiron's boombox and some loud music. They went back outside and prayed the batteries weren't dead. When he pressed play, the pigeons stopped. They abandoned the track and flew into the sky, at least until the Apollo kids took them down. The camp was saved, but everyone was still wounded with bird pecks. "Bravo!" Tantalus shouted. "We have our first winner of the summer! Clarice LaRue! And now for the punishment. For the troublemakers. For disrupting this race." The way Tantalus saw it, the pigeons were minding their own business and wouldn't have attacked if Percy, Tyson, and Annabeth hadn't disturbed them with their bad chariot driving. So all 3 of them were put to dishwashing duty in the big house with the harpies. The only good that came out of it was that it gave Percy more time to talk with Annabeth about his dream, and that time she not only listened, she started to believe. "But he didn't even get the chance to say exactly what it is," Percy said. "Well, you said that he said Polyhemus is a shepherd, right?" Annabeth asked. "So what do you get when you skin a ram? A coat?" "Not just any coat," said Annabeth. "The coat of a ram is called a fleece, and if it happens to have nature magic on it, the golden fleece." The golden fleece came from a magic ram which was created by Zeus to save 2 demigods from becoming human sacrifices, Cadmus and Europa. So the ram carried them far away across the sea to the kingdom of Colchis, but Europa didn't make it. When Cadmus got there, he sacrificed the ram and skinned off its fleece and hung it on a tree in the middle of the kingdom. Then beyond that point, all the sickness was wiped away from everyone in the kingdom. All the people, the animals, even all the plant life was restored. Every last living thing in the kingdom became completely healthy and had absolutely no sickness for generations to come. At least until Jason came and took it. So if it could heal an entire kingdom, maybe it could do the same for Camp Half-Blood. And now Grover's found it, Percy said, so we know where to look. It seems all too easy, Annabeth said. What if it's a trap? There's not much choice if we want to save Grover and the camp, Percy said. But there's just one problem. Where's the Sea of Monsters? Well, it used to be in the Mediterranean Sea, of course, where Greece is, Annabeth pointed out. But like everything else, it shifts locations like the west center of power shifts. Percy remembered being told about that, and he learned it from experience. Last year he learned Olympus was floating over the Empire State Building, and the underworld was underneath Hollywood. It's off the east coast and northeast of Florida, she continued. The Bermuda Triangle. We have to tell Tantalus, Percy said. We'll tell him in front of the whole camp at the campfire tonight. Then when everyone hears, they'll pressure him. That night the Apollo kids tried to rise up everyone's spirit from the pigeon attack with music, but not much luck. Dionysus went to bed a little earlier. Now about tomorrow's schedule, Tantalus said, but Percy caught his attention before he could say anything. Something to say, kitchen boy? Tantalus said. Percy stood up with his head held high, and Annabeth stood up with him. There was dead silence, but luckily for them, that meant everyone was listening. Percy and Annabeth told them the whole story. But that's just nonsense, said Tantalus. We don't need saving, and beside that, the Sea of Monsters is so large there's no way you would know where to look exactly. Oh yes, I do, said Percy. He remembered the numbers the three fates had given him. Now he was sure what they meant, and now was the time. 30, 31, 75, 12. 30 degrees, 31 minutes north, 75 degrees, 12 minutes west. Those are the coordinates that lead to it, Annabeth said. We need a quest. Now wait just a minute, said Tantalus, but a roaring chant filled the bonfire. We need a quest! We need a quest! All right, you little brats, fine, Tantalus shouted. I shall offer a champion to take on this quest, and they shall sail the Sea of Monsters and bring back the fleece or die trying. The champion shall consult the oracle and choose two companions, and I think the choice of the champion is obvious, yes? One who's earned the camp's respect and proven themselves in the activities and in the protection of the camp. You shall be given this quest. Clarice LaRue. The Ares kids cheered. Wait, said Percy. I was the one who was warned about it and was given the coordinates, and Grover's my friend. Sit on it, Jackson. You already got your turn last year, said one of the Ares kids. I accept, Clarice said, and she headed to the big house to consult the oracle. And everyone remember, Tantalus said, nobody else leaves this camp without my permission, or they will be expelled. That is, if they don't get eaten by the harpies first, since they're taking the night shift watch from now on, and they're always hungry. Of course, not as much as I could ever be. Now to bed, everyone, and sleep well. While in bed, Tyson asked Percy about the quest. It was a little hard for Percy to explain the situation to Tyson, but he understood that Percy needed to go on a trip, and Tantalus wouldn't let him. You'll go anyway? He asked. I don't know, said Percy. It's going to be pretty hard. I'll help, Tyson said. No, big guy, Percy said. I couldn't ask you to do that. It's way too dangerous. Annabeth doesn't like Cyclopses, Tyson said. Daddy always cared for me, he said. Now I think it was mean to have a Cyclops boy. I shouldn't have been born. Don't think like that, Percy told him. Annabeth does like you, and Poseidon did claim you, so he must care. Only then did he remember that he used to be living in the streets in a box for who knows how long. What kind of dad would let that happen to his kid, even if he was a monster? It was no wonder Tyson thought Poseidon didn't care about him. The camp will be a good home for you, Tyson, said Percy, and the others will get used to you, I promise. But Tyson was already snoring. Percy just laid in bed with his eyes open, trying not to fall asleep. He was too afraid he'd dream about Grover again. So he got out of bed and headed for the camp's beach. The campers weren't allowed to run around outside after dark. If they got caught, they would be, like Tantalus said, expelled or get eaten by harpies. As Percy laid out on the beach with some coke and looking up at the constellations, his attention was caught by a strange voice. Beautiful, aren't they? Percy turned around to see the voice belonged to a strange man in jogging clothes. He had gray hair and a good smile. But what didn't make sense to Percy was that he seemed mortal, and he was inside the camp. Sure, the boarders were failing, but how could the harpies miss him? And technically there wasn't much of civilization anywhere for miles. Did this guy really jog all the way down that road? Mind if I join you? I haven't sat down in ages, he said. Percy felt like he should have ran and warned the others about this guy, but the guy seemed to take everything so calmly. Sure, Percy replied. Then a phone in the man's pocket rang. He took it out and extended the antenna. As he talked into the phone, he seemed to not even notice the two really tiny snakes crawling on the antenna. A gift to mankind, huh? The man said. You don't know how many of those we delivered. Listen, I gotta go. And he hung up the phone. Sorry about that, he said. Now, where was I? You have snakes on your phone, said Percy. Oh, them? It's okay. They don't bite. Say hello, George and Martha. Hello, George and Martha, said a raspy male voice inside Percy's head. The jogger put away his phone again and looked up at the stars. It's been a long time since I gotten some relaxation, he said. So, what solutions do you have about this quest, Percy? That was weird, but it wouldn't be the first time Percy ran into a stranger that knew his name without even asking first. Who are you? He asked. Haven't you figured it out yet? The jogger asked. Then he took out his phone again. Original form, please. Then the phone glowed blue and magically stretched out into a wooden staff with wings at the top, and the two snakes grew full size and curled around the staff. It was the catechist. The man was Hermes, god of messages, healing, and traveling, and thieves. You're Luke Castellan's father, Percy said. Well, normally people introduce me as the god of messages, Hermes said. God of thieves works, said George. Oh, don't mind George, said the female voice that belonged to Martha. He's just jealous 'cause Hermes likes me better. Does not, George argued. Does too, said Martha. Does not, does too, does not, does too. Quiet, you two, or I'll turn you two back into a phone, Hermes said. Now, Percy, you still haven't answered my question. What do you intend to do about this quest? Well, I don't have permission to go, he answered. Will that stop you? Well, I do want to go. I mean, I have to save Grover. Hermes smiled. You know, you remind me a lot of me when I was a kid, Percy. You see, it's like this. Young people don't always do what they're told, but if they can manage to pull it off and make something good out of it in the end, then they just might have a chance to escape punishment. You're saying I should go anyway, even without permission, Percy guessed. Martha, may I get the first package, please? Then Martha opened her mouth impossibly wide, and out popped an old-fashioned stainless steel thermos with a scene of Hercules fighting a lion, with words that said, Hercules busts heads. It was a great show back in the day, Hermes said. Of course, this would have been a lot more if I had the whole lunchbox. Or if it hadn't been in Martha's mouth. said George. This is a gift? Percy asked. Yep, you uncap this, and you release the winds of the four corners of the earth, Hermes said. That should give you great speed like me when you need it, but only when you really need it. I'm sure you'll know when, and only unscrew it a tiny bit. And now for my second gift, Hermes continued. George, if you please. Then George coughed up a plastic cylinder filled with chewable vitamins. Minotaur-shaped lemon ones and grape ones that were fury-shaped. Or wait, were those hydras? Oh well. These should make you feel like yourself again, said Hermes. But remember, don't take one unless you really, really need it. Trust me, you'll know when the time comes. Lord Hermes, why are you helping me? Percy asked. Because I believe you can save a lot more people than just your friend Grover, he answered. You're talking about your son, Luke Castellan, aren't you? Percy asked. But he's changed. Helping Kronos was his decision. I can't help him. Percy, Hermes said, if there's anything I've learned in the past few millennia, it's that you can't give up on family. You understand, Percy? I'm not sure, Percy said. Don't worry, you will, someday, Hermes said. In the meantime, I should be going now, and your friends should be coming right about now. Then he snapped his fingers, and 3 waterproof bags appeared. Oh, and your father should help you across his territory to reach the ship, if you just ask nicely, of course. Sure enough, there was a cruise ship in plain sight floating on the horizon and heading south. I suggest you make up your mind in about the next 5 minutes. That's when the harpies come and find you, said Hermes. Good night, and may the gods be with you. Good luck, said Martha. Bring me back a rat, said George. Then as Percy watched Hermes run down the beach, he vanished out of thin air. Hey, Percy, Annabeth shouted. What's going on? Percy told them about his conversation with Hermes. Percy, we have to do the quest, Annabeth said. Well, even if we do, we'll get expelled, and Cameron told you to protect me, said Percy. So I'll protect you while on the quest. Plus, if we don't do this, there won't be any camp to come back to, said Annabeth. Tyson could stay behind and tell him that we... I wanna go, Tyson said. No, said Annabeth. Percy, you know that's impossible. Percy looked at the two of them back and forth. Sure, Tyson was strong enough, and he saved Percy's life twice, but Tyson was still clumsy and not so brave. Percy wasn't sure how he'd keep him safe, and he'd probably get them killed. He can come if he wants, he said. Either way, we can't leave him. Tyson clapped happily while Annabeth gave Percy the evil look. Okay, fine, so how do we get there? She asked. My dad should help me, Percy said as he stepped into the water. Dad? He said. We need your help getting to that ship before we get eaten and stuff, so... 1 minute, nothing happened. Then the next minute, 3 creatures with horse heads popped out of the water. Fish ponies, Tyson said. Hippocampi, said Annabeth. They're beautiful. Admire them later. Let's get going before the harpies come, Percy said. So each of the 3 demigods hopped on a hippocampi and were carried across the sea, and they followed the ship towards Florida, leading down into the Sea of Monsters. Percy felt worried if he would ever see the camp again, but now he had other problems just waiting to come. As they moved closer and closer to the ship, only then did they realize how huge it was. Its hull was 10 stories high with another dozen levels at the top. On the bow line, its name spelled the Princess Andromeda. Attached to the bow was the statue of a woman. She was sculpted to look like she was chained to the ship while screaming. That was weird, if he used that to decorate a cruise ship. Percy remembered in the mythology about a woman named Andromeda. She was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster until she was saved by Percy's namesake, Perseus, by turning the monster into stone with the head of Medusa. That Perseus had always won. He was one of the more luckier heroes, the only one with a happy ending. Even though Perseus was a son of Zeus instead of Poseidon, that's why Percy's mom named him after Perseus, just hoping that it would bring him luck. But by the looks of things, it hadn't been as easy. "How do we get aboard?" Annabeth asked. The hippocampi seemed to know what they wanted, because they swam around the ship until they found a service ladder. It was almost hard for Tyson to say goodbye to his hippocampus. "I'll miss you, Rainbow," he said sadly. Next thing they knew, they were in the enemy's territory. Since they were now beyond the boundaries of Camp Half-Blood, the mist transformed Tyson's face to look like he had two eyes again. So he didn't have to worry about scaring any mortals in the real world. Seems kind of unfair that the mist can do that for Cyclopes and not do the same for a satyr's goat legs, don't you think? As they climbed higher levels and made it as far as halfway around the ship, they realized they didn't run into a single soul. The place felt like a ghost ship. Sure, it was the middle of the night, but still, not a sound. "Oh no, bad smell," Tyson said. "What? I don't smell anything," said Annabeth. "I think Cyclopes have better sense of smell, kinda like satyrs," Percy said. "Okay, so what do you smell?" Annabeth asked. "Something bad," Tyson said. "Okay, that clears things up," said Annabeth. Percy sensed something of his own. Just that same usual demigod instinct letting him know something wasn't right. "We should really find a place to hide," he said. So they kept walking until they found at least one cabin on level 9 which was surprisingly open and had nobody inside. There weren't any luggage bags anywhere or any sound in the bathroom, and the place looked organized and cleaned up, so it seemed as if no one had recently rented it. That was weird. "You guys can have this one. I'll look for my own," said Annabeth, "and please don't touch anything." "You think this place is enchanted?" Percy asked. "I don't know. Just please be careful," said Annabeth. And she closed the door and left. When they opened their bags, it seemed as if Hermes really did think of everything. Extra clothes, toiletries, drachmas, and even plenty of mortal money. Even Tyson's tools were packed for him, which made him real happy. So he took out the metal parts in his pockets and started tinkering for a project which he wouldn't say a word about. Seconds later, Percy crashed out on the bed and had his worst dream yet. Actually, it was in a place Percy had been before, last year on his quest for the Master Bolt. He was standing on the edge of a cliff in a pitch-black cavern looking down into an endless pit. The entrance to Tartarus. He heard an old and cold and dark voice coming from down there, which he recognized from before. "Well, well, well, if it isn't the young hero making his way to another great victory. Don't let me stop you. Perhaps this time when you fail, you'll wonder if it's worthwhile slaving for the gods. How exactly has your father shown his appreciation lately?" Then Percy woke up to an Australian voice on the intercom. "Good morning, passengers. We'll be at sea all day today, and the weather's perfect for today's pool party. And let's not forget our special guest disemboweling later today." Did he say bowling practice? Percy asked himself. Boy, did he sure hope he was right. After he and Tyson got dressed and met up with Annabeth, they were surprised to see people walking around. Nobody looked at them or asked who they were, and weirdest of all, every one of them had blank expressions, so something definitely wasn't right. "I think they're all in some kind of trance," said Annabeth. Then they heard a reptilian voice coming from around the corner. "6 more joined yesterday." They scattered to the nearest place they could use for hiding. The girls' bathroom. "Yes," said a second voice. "Soon we shall be strong." "We gotta get out of here," said Annabeth. Then Percy heard a voice that chilled him more than any monster. "Only a matter of time. Don't push me, Argreus!" It was the voice that Percy could never forget. The voice of Luke Castellan. "I'm not pushing," said the deeper voice. "If this gamble doesn't pay off—" "It will pay off," Luke said. "They'll accept the bait. Now let's get back to the Admiralty Suite." "Leave now?" Tyson whimpered. "We can't," Percy told him. "We had to find out what Luke is up to," Annabeth agreed. "And if it's possible, we're going to beat him up, chain him up, and drag him up to Mount Olympus." They went back to their cabins and grabbed their stuff. They definitely didn't want to stay another night on that ship. They followed the "You Are Here" signs to find their way to the Admiralty Suite, which was on Deck 13. On their way, they heard voices coming from down the hall, again, and all three of them hid in the supply closet. "Did you see that Ethiopian dragon in the cargo hold?" said one of the voices. Then they heard a more familiar voice. "I hear they got 2 more coming," he said. "That's Chris Rodriguez, from the Hermes cabin," said Annabeth. Percy could recall meeting Chris at camp last year. He wasn't really a son of Hermes, just another one of those undetermined kids whose godly parent never claimed him. Then Percy remembered he didn't see Chris at camp at all during the summer, but what was he doing here? They kept walking down the hallways and into the inside of the ship. Percy started to feel a cold and unpleasant presence letting him know they were closer to Luke. Eventually, they came in front of 2 twin doors that looked like the entrance to something important.
"Stop!" Tyson whimpered. "Voices inside!"
"You can hear from that far?" Percy asked. Tyson started repeating the voices he heard. He heard and repeated multiple sentences like, "The prophecy ourselves," and "The fools don't know which way to turn." And other things like, "You think the old horseman is gone for good," and "They can't trust him with the skeletons in his closet. The poisoning of the tree was the final straw." "Stop that, Tyson," said Annabeth. "That's just creepy. How do you do that?"
"Just listening,"
Tyson answered. Then, slam! The 2 doors swung open and 2 bare-headed monsters stood right there, pointing spears at the kids. And in between them, there he stood, Luke Castellan. "Well, if it isn't my 2 favorite cousins," he said. "Come on in." Luke threw himself on the couch and made himself comfortable. "How you loving my quarters?" he asked. "Quite nicer than the Hermes cabin, huh?" It had only been a year since Percy last saw Luke at camp last summer when he tried to kill him, but he seemed so different and so much older now. He was wearing dress clothes, and his hair was done nicer. Over the past year, Percy could only imagine running into Luke a bunch of times since he tried to kill him before, but now that they were face to face for real, Percy couldn't help but feel so nervous. Percy noticed leaning in a corner near Luke was a sword he could recall seeing Luke use at camp last year. He was told the blade was made of 2 different metals. One side of the blade was a type of metal created by the gods called celestial bronze, like Percy's sword, and the other side was made of regular mortal steel. This way so the sword could kill monsters and humans. But what was even more surprising was a 10-foot-long golden casket on the opposite side of the room. Despite the warm sunlight from out the window, the casket seemed to make the room feel cold. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Luke. "Where are my manners? This is Argyus and his twin brother Aureus. Suppose you heard of their story. And did I mention they like half-bloods?"
"For lunch,"
said Argyus. "So," Luke said, "you survived another year. How's school? Or how's your mom?" "You poisoned Thalia's tree," Percy said. "Okay, yeah, I did. So what?" Luke sighed. "How could you? And after she saved your life, yours and mine, how could you dishonor her like that?" Annabeth said angrily.
"I didn't dishonor her. The gods did,"
Luke said. "If she were alive, she'd be on my side. You'd be too, if you'd understand." "I understand that you want to destroy the camp. You're a monster," said Annabeth.
"The gods have blinded you, Annabeth,"
said Luke.
"We don't need them. Just imagine life without them. Together we could start a new world. And we could use your intelligence, Annabeth."
You mean because you don't have any of your own? Annabeth argued. I know you, Annabeth, said Luke. You deserve better than to tag along on some hopeless, useless, and meaningless quest that won't actually get you anywhere. The camp will eventually be overrun by monsters and be destroyed. And if any of the campers do survive, they'll have no choice. They will join us or join together in extinction. I'm also quite surprised at you, Annabeth, Luke continued. You out of all people choosing this pathetic excuse for company? A Cyclops? And you tell me I was the one dishonoring Thalia? Stop it, said Annabeth as she started to cry. While she buried her face in her hands, Percy was now confused of what Luke was talking about, but there was no time to worry about it. Leave her alone, he said, and leave Tyson out of this. Ah, yes, your father claimed him, so I've heard, Luke said. Now that was surprising. How did you know about that? Percy asked. Oh, I know everything, Percy, Luke answered. This monster's your brother. You're taking a quest to find the Golden Fleece, which was really Clarice's. And what were those coordinates again? 30, 31, 75, 12? Yes, I have a couple of friends of my own at camp who still like to help me. You mean spies? Percy said. Come on, Percy, Luke said. You think Poseidon cares at all about you any more than he does this monster? The gods are using us. They always were. You have any idea what your 16th birthday holds? Did Chiron ever actually tell you what the Oracle's prophecy was about? My 16th birthday? Percy thought to himself. He did recall Chiron telling him about a prophecy he received from the Oracle years ago. Percy wasn't told what it was about exactly, but he knew he was part of it. If it had something to do with his birthday, to him that sounded scary. I know what I need to know, he said. Like, for instance, who my enemies are. Then you're a fool, Luke said. Percy's no fool, Tyson shouted. Before he could try to charge Luke, he got hit in the back and stumbled to the floor. Sorry, Cyclops, Luke said. Looks like my grizzly friends together are too strong of a match even for you. Luke, please, just listen, Percy said. Your father sent us. Don't even mention him, Luke growled. He told us to come here, Percy continued. We thought it was our ride for our quest, but he sent us to find you. He told me he wouldn't give up on you, no matter how angry you are. He abandoned me, Luke said. I want to see his throne crumble to pieces along with the rest of Olympus. Maybe you can tell him that the next time he talks to you instead of me. And don't think it won't happen, because the more half-bloods join us, the weaker the Olympians get, and the stronger we get. And also the stronger he gets, Luke said as he pointed to the golden casket. Wait, said Percy, you don't mean... He's reforming, said Luke. Little by little, we're calling his life force out of the pit. With every recruit who pledges our cause, another small piece appears. That's disgusting, Annabeth said. Shut up, Luke told her. Your mother was born from right out of Zeus's skull. Soon there will be enough of the Titan Lord's remains so that we can make him whole again. You're insane, said Annabeth. Join us, Percy, said Luke. Just think about it. Your mom could never have to work again. You could buy a mansion. Annabeth, you could build a monument that could last thousands of years. Go to Tartarus, said Annabeth. Then he pressed a red button on her remote, and 2 human guards armed with nightsticks walked in. They had that same blank expression the other mortal passengers had. It's time to feed the Ethiopian dragon, Luke told them. Take these foolish stowaways down there and show them how it's done. Argreus, stay with me. We have some important matters to discuss. As Aureus pushed the trio down the hallway with the 2 human guards behind, Percy thought about what Luke had said about Aureus and his brother. How they were too strong for Tyson. How they were too strong together. So he thought to himself, what could have been the chances of taking them separately? When they walked out onto the open decks, Percy looked at Tyson. Now, he told him. and thanked the Olympians. He understood. He turned and smacked Aureus and making him fall flat. While Annabeth kicked one of the guards away, the other one had already hit the alarm switch. "Lifeboat!" Percy yelled. They hopped into the nearest one, and Percy cut the release ropes, and they free fell into the ocean. They escaped. Percy managed to get out the thermos Hermes gave him. As all three of them held on tight, Percy unscrewed the thermos a quarter turn, and the boat was instantly pushed through the air super fast. They bumped a few times on the water, and then they zoomed away from the cruise ship. The ship got smaller and smaller until it was out of sight. The thermos wind created a good sea spray which started to project a rainbow, so Annabeth thought it would be their chance to call for some help. She took out a drachma, prayed to the rainbow goddess, threw the coin in the rainbow, and asked for Chiron. The rainbow revealed an image of Chiron standing in a party crowd filled with a bunch of other centaurs. When he saw them, they told him everything they learned on the quest, but it was hard to tell if he heard them with the loud noises on his end of the projection. "Percy," said Chiron, "you must watch out for—" But more noise blocked him out. "Annabeth, you should have never let him leave camp, but if you do get the fleece—" "Yeah, baby!" another centaur shouted. "Miami!" Chiron shouted. "I'll try to keep watch." The image disappeared, and then the rainbow faded away, and Chiron was gone. Then suddenly they noticed land on the horizon, a beach that Annabeth recognized as Virginia Beach. "But how could the ship travel so far overnight?" she asked. "That's gotta be like 530 nautical miles. Whoa, I wonder how I figured that out," Percy said. "I think it's because you're in your dad's territory," said Annabeth. "It's kind of like how you feel so good at sea more than in the sky. You think perfectly here. That's so cool." Then Tyson noticed a Coast Guard ship in the distance coming their way, and they knew they couldn't let it catch them. But Annabeth had an idea. They didn't try to get closer just yet, but she said to turn north and keep going until they made it to Chesapeake Bay. They kept going until Annabeth said to stop in a river deep within the bay, where there was nothing but disgusting wilderness. The air was muggy, filled with mosquitoes, and the smell of the water turned from seawater to fresh water. Annabeth hopped out of the boat, walked a few feet, and stopped in front of a pile of branches. She pulled on one backwards like a door, revealing a camouflage shelter. Inside, there was surprisingly everything required for camping. There were some blankets, an ice chest, a lantern, and even some ambrosia. There was even some demigod weapons. There were some extra swords, a quiver filled with plenty of arrows, and a bow. Percy could tell by the smell that no one had stepped inside for a long time. "A half-blood hideout?" he asked Annabeth. "You made this place?" "Yeah, me and Thalia, and Luke," she said. Percy realized the way she said Luke's name, she sounded like she was afraid it might bother Percy. But Percy already knew that Thalia and Luke took care of Annabeth while running away together before Grover found them and took them to camp. So why would it bother him? Well, he did feel a little jealous sometimes just hearing about it or thinking about it. "So you don't think Luke will find us here?" he asked. "No," said Annabeth. "We made a bunch of these, so I doubt he even remembers, or even cares." She sat down and started going through her bag. To tell by how she turned her back, Percy realized she wasn't in the best mood to talk. Tyson, why don't you go out and take a look around outside?" Percy suggested. "Maybe there might be a convenience store nearby with some snacks, like donuts or something. But don't go too far."
"Okay, I'll look for donuts in the woods,"
Tyson said.
"Here, donuts,"
he said as he started walking outside.
"Here, donuts."
When he left, Percy sat down close to Annabeth. "Hey, listen," he said to her. "I'm sorry about, seeing Luke the way he is now." "It's not your fault," said Annabeth. "That escape seemed almost too easy," Percy said. It felt as if he let us go. I was thinking the same thing, said Annabeth. Remember how we overheard him say something about a gamble and some bait? I think he was talking about us. But which one's the bait? Percy asked. The fleece or maybe Grover? I don't know, Annabeth said. I just can't believe it was him that poisoned Thalia's tree. What did he mean when he said Thalia would join him? Percy asked. She gave him a look which made him suddenly regret the question, especially since she was holding her knife. Then she said, You know, Percy, you remind me a lot of Thalia. Comparing you and her together, you're so much alike. Maybe if you two met, you might have been friends. And don't you ever get angry with your dad sometimes? Well, so did she. Would you turn against Olympus because of that? No, Percy said. Well then, I guess she wouldn't either, so Luke's wrong, said Annabeth. He wanted to ask her about what Luke had said about his 16th birthday, but then he figured he wasn't supposed to know until later, assuming he would live long enough, so he thought of another question. What did Luke mean when he said something about having Tyson for company and dishonoring Thalia? It had to do with the way Thalia died, she said. You can never trust a Cyclops, Percy. On that night, when we reached Half-Blood Hill, when Thalia sacrificed herself, she was... Then the door opened and there stood Tyson, with a box of donuts? Powdered donuts, he said happily. What? Annabeth said confusedly. Where did you get that? We're in the middle of the wilderness. There's nothing around for... 50 feet, that way, Tyson said. Monster Donut Shop. He led them to a nearby hill, and on the other side stood a small convenience store right in the middle of the woods. Monster Donut Shop. Okay, this is bad. Something's not right here. Get down, said Annabeth. Why? Percy asked. Tyson went in there, and he came out with donuts. Nothing happened to him. Because he's a monster, Annabeth said. Oh, come on, said Percy. You don't really think it's literal just because it says monster, do you? Don't you think it's a little more than a coincidence that Tyson found a place with donuts right when you specifically told him donuts? Annabeth asked. It could be some kind of bait, she said. Don't you ever wonder how... What? What is it? Percy asked. Shh, said Annabeth. No sudden movements. Just turn around real slowly. He did as Annabeth said, and when he turned around, there he saw it. The Hydra! It was about the size of a rhino and had 3 snake-like heads. He was about to get out his sword until Annabeth whispered, Not yet! He knew what she meant. He learned that some monsters don't see very well, so there might have been chances the Hydra would have just slipped by. If Percy took out his sword, its shining blade might get the Hydra's attention. It was just a few feet away, sniffing through the ground and trees, like it was tracking something through the scent. Tyson stepped back in fear and... Oh, snap. He stepped on a twig, making a big snapping sound. All 3 Hydra heads looked straight towards the trio. Scatter! Annabeth yelled. She jumped to the Hydra's right, while Percy jumped backwards as one Hydra head spat out some green liquid that splashed on the ground. Percy took out Riptide and prepared to fight. Percy, wait! No! Annabeth shouted. Don't cut off the... Uh-oh, too late. He already sliced off one of the Hydra heads. In just seconds, the headless neck grew back not 1 head, but 2 heads. Now the monster had 4 heads. Percy, we have to kill it with fire, Annabeth shouted. Percy remembered about that story, about the way Heracles used fire on their necks before they grew a new head. But they didn't have any fire, or anything to help make fire. Percy started backing up, and the Hydra followed him. Annabeth stayed behind it and tried distracting it by deflecting the sunlight with her knife, which didn't work. Then, Tyson jumped between Percy and the Hydra and started jumping on all its heads like whack-a-mole. No hurting, my friends, he shouted to the monster. But Percy knew even that couldn't keep it distracted forever, and he had no idea what else to do. Then he heard a familiar female voice from out of nowhere. "There! Fire at will!" said the voice. "Hit the dirt!" shouted Annabeth. Somehow she knew what was about to happen slightly faster than Percy did. They fell flat on the ground, and then, boom! In a flash of light, the Hydra's whole body was completely blown apart, leaving slime everywhere. Rose," said Annabeth. "Steamship," said Tyson, pointing in the direction of the river. Sure enough, the explosion came from cannons of a Civil War ironclad floating in the river. The letters on the side read SS Birmingham. Standing on the top of it was a crew of corpses. The only one standing on the ship that they recognized was a tall girl in Greek armor. It was Clarice. "Losers," she said. "Well, looks like I have no choice but to rescue you. Come on board." The ship was just creepy. As she gave the trio a tour around it, there wasn't a single crew member who wasn't an undead corpse, and they thought the Princess Andromeda felt like a ghost ship. Eventually, Clarice led them into the captain's quarters. Dinner was being served inside by skeletal crewmen, and they were definitely starving right now. There was plenty of sandwiches and sodas for everyone. "Boy, are you guys in trouble," said Clarice. "Tantalus says that you guys got expelled. Forever. And Mr. D says if you ever do come back, you'll be turned into squirrels." "Where did you get a warship?" Percy asked. "My dad, of course," she answered. "What, do you think your dad's the only one with sea power? I just prayed to him for a good transport, and here it is. And every one of these crewmen are ones who were defeated in war thanks to him. They'll do anything I tell them. Isn't that right, guys?" "Clarice, we ran into Luke, and I think he's after the fleece too," said Annabeth. "He's got the coordinates, and he's heading south. He also has a ship full of monsters." "Well, perfect," she said. "So if I can blow up a whole Hydra to bits, I can blow him out of the water just as easy." No, you don't understand," said Annabeth. "We have to work together." "No way," Clarice said. "This is my quest, so I get to be the hero, and no one, including you losers, are going to take that away from me." "Where are your cabin mates?" Percy asked. "You were allowed 2 companions to join you on the quest, weren't you?" "Yeah, but I let them stay behind, to help protect the camp," Clarice said. "I don't really need them anyway. Or you." "Clarice, don't you realize that Tantalus is a jerk?" Percy asked. "He's just using you. He doesn't care about the camp any more than he loved to see it get destroyed. He's setting you up to fail." "Well, I don't care about whatever the Oracle—" She stopped herself. "What? What do you mean? What did the Oracle tell you?" Percy asked. "Nothing. None of your business," she said. "All you need to know is that I'm finishing this quest, and you losers are not getting in my way. On the other hand, I can't let you guys go." "So we're prisoners?" Annabeth asked. "Guessed," Clarice answered. "For now. Captain, show our guests to their quarters on the lower decks," she said. "And if they don't mind their manners, show them how we deal with enemy spies." They were taken to their new quarters, and Percy decided to rest for a while, only to be awakened minutes later by alarm bells. He heard the captain's voice say, "All hands on deck. We are now approaching the entrance to the Sea of Monsters." Percy exited his quarters, but then his attention was caught by some arguing he heard from underneath him. He crouched down and peeked through the ventilation grates. Clarice was talking to an image that was projected in the steam from the pipes. It was her father, Percy's least favorite Olympian, Ares the war god.
"You're pathetic, little girl," he said. "I should have let one of my sons go on this quest."
"I will succeed," said Clarice, "and I'll make you proud."
You'd better, said Ares, 'cause if you let that slime ball Jackson get in the way. But the oracle said, I don't care about whatever words come out of a dead woman, said Ares. You will succeed, 'cause if you don't...
She flinched when she saw his fist. Percy never thought someone as tough as Clarice would flinch.
Do we have an understanding?
Ares growled. More alarm bells rang, and Percy ran up to the spar deck to meet up with Tyson and Annabeth. He didn't say a word about what he saw. As much as it bothered him, he didn't really know what to think. Seconds later, Clarice came out and took a pair of binoculars from one of the corpses. Percy tried not to look at her.
At last, she said. Captain, full steam ahead.
There wasn't much in the direction she was looking, except a giant spiral-shaped storm cloud hovering over the water. Percy could see something fuzzy in the distance, but it was too far to make out what it was. One thing was for sure, however close they were, they definitely traveled much closer and less safer into the Bermuda Triangle than any mortal ship could travel. The ship kept moving closer, and now Percy could see what the fuzzy object was. It was a giant boulder sticking out of the surface. No, a cliff about 100 feet tall. Percy swore there was something at the top, but it was too high and not clear enough to see. Beyond that, right below the massive storm, was something that looked a lot like a giant whirlpool.
It's Charybdis and Scylla, said Clarice. We have to sail right through.
Are you crazy? Asked Annabeth. If I want to get into the sea of monsters, sailing between them is the only way in, Clarice said. Can't you just go around? Percy asked. No, she said. You don't know anything, do you? If I tried, they would just appear in my path again. And don't worry, if Charybdis tries to swallow us, we'll fire our cannons and blow her straight to Tartarus. Oh my God, so you are crazy, said Annabeth. Just watch and learn, wise girl, said Clarice.
Captain, set a course through Charybdis.
Aye, aye, my lady, said the captain. The sound of Charybdis kept getting louder as they got closer. Her roar was like the sound of the world's largest toilet flushing. Every time she inhaled, the ship pulled forward, and every time she exhaled, it pushed back. As much as Scylla's cliff sounded dangerous, Percy thought sailing close to it might be the best way to avoid getting swallowed by Charybdis. Percy, what if you could just take control of the water here? Annabeth asked. You are Poseidon's son, after all. Percy closed his eyes and tried to concentrate, but he couldn't seem to get the water to calm down. The monster was just too loud and powerful. I can't, he said. The waves won't respond. Before they could notice, the giant toilet monster flushed with a mighty roar, forcing everyone to the floor. Full reverse! Clarice screamed. The ship started to spin around the whirlpool, and hard waves hit the sides. Prepare the cannons! Clarice shouted. Another corpse forced his way next to Clarice, who for some reason was on fire. Boiler room overheated, ma'am, he said. Prepare yourselves for death. No, Tyson shouted. I can fix it. What? You? Clarice said incredulously. Cyclopes are immune to fire, and he's good with mechanics, said Annabeth. Then go already, Clarice said impatiently. No, Tyson, said Percy. It's too dangerous. Tyson smiled. Only way, brother. Be right back. As Percy watched him follow the corpse down the hatch, he thought about Tyson's expression. He'd never seen Tyson look so confident before. The ship kept lurching, and they were much closer to the edge of the funnel. And just below the waterline was the mouth of Charybdis, with her filthy lips and her gigantic boat-sized teeth. It was like a worm's mouth, only a lot bigger. Port side cannons are in range, my lady, the captain shouted. Fire away, shouted Clarice. 4 cannons were shot towards the center of the monster. 3 cannonballs went past the teeth while the other dropped into its mouth. Percy knew the firing was hopeless. It would take more power than they even had on the whole ship. Then they felt the ship's vibration change. The humming of the engine felt stronger and steadier, and the ship started pulling away from the monster's mouth. "Tyson! He did it!" Annabeth shouted in excitement. "We're still not there yet," said Clarice. "We still have to stay close if we want to actually get into the Sea of Monsters." "We may not have another chance," Percy said. "If we risk that again, we could die." Then something unexpected happened. The mouth exploded open and out popped the cannonball it had swallowed. It crashed into the side of the ship with a big bam. "Abandon ship!" the captain shouted. "No!" Clarice yelled. "We have no choice, my lady. The ship is breaking up." He never got to finish, because right where the captain was standing, something big and green had appeared as fast as lightning for 1 second and disappeared just as fast. And where the captain had stood, all that was left was his legs. The kids didn't even notice how much closer they were to the cliffside now. And at the very top, hanging over the edge, was Charybdis' sister, Scylla! It was a dragon-like creature with multiple heads like the Hydra, only with heads that were 3 times bigger and necks 10 times longer. The demigods watched as more heads kept snatching up more corpses. "Lifeboat!" Annabeth yelled. "We can't escape fast enough in that thing," Clarice shouted. "We have to try," said Annabeth. "Here," said Percy, "take the thermos. I'll get Tyson." "No, Percy," said Annabeth. "The heat in there will kill you." He ignored her, and just as he was about to jump down the hatch, Scylla got him. But he managed to jab her in the eye with his sword. But then the monster dropped him and he fell. He descended about 100 feet down through the air and the ship exploded. "Tyson!" he yelled. He kept falling faster and faster, and then... splash! He was knocked out. Percy woke up with Annabeth sitting in front of him. They were on a rowboat with a makeshift sail made of metal fabric. They made it through the entrance to the Sea of Monsters. "Easy, you need to rest," she said. "Tyson," Percy muttered. Annabeth shook her head. "Percy, I'm really sorry," she said. "But there might be a chance he could still be out there somewhere. After all, fire can't kill him." But even that didn't make Percy feel any more hopeful. If the explosion could rip the metal fabric of the whole ship, how could Tyson even survive that? There was no way. He had given his life for the rest of them, and all Percy could think about was the times when he felt embarrassed just being related to him. Percy looked in his bag, which was now missing some stuff, probably from getting snatched by Scylla. Hermes' multivitamins was still safe, but other than that, everything else was now lost. His pen had magically reappeared back into his pocket like it always did, no matter where he lost it. Hermes' thermos was somehow now empty. Then he sighed and looked at Annabeth. "Maybe you were right," he said to her. "Maybe you can't trust a Cyclops." "Okay, look, I'm sorry, Percy," she said. "I was wrong about him. I just wish I could tell him that." He felt like staying mad at her, but he knew that wouldn't help. They'd been through a lot together in just 2 summers. They both saved each other's lives plenty of times, and they've become perfectly good friends. It felt so stupid just acting like his relationship with his brother would interfere with that. He thought about Luke's reaction when he told him about his dad. Then he thought about his prophecy. Then he figured he should just go ahead and ask. "Annabeth, what is my prophecy?" he asked. "Look, I know Chiron promised the gods he wouldn't say anything, but you didn't really promise." Annabeth pursed her lips. "Percy, It's better for heroes not to know their own future because when they do, they just try to change it and it never works. But Luke said something big happens on my 16th birthday, Percy said. What does that mean? Well, I don't know the full prophecy, she said, but it warns about a child of the big three. It says once he or she reaches 16, they'll decide the fate of the gods, so they'll either be saved or be destroyed. That's also why your dad and your uncles made that oath to stop having children before, to prevent that prophecy from coming true. But if that's true, then I would have to survive at least 3 more years, Percy said. When Chiron learned about Thalia, said Annabeth, he used to think the prophecy was talking about her, at least until, and then you came along. Wait, said Percy, you don't think that half-blood could possibly mean, like, maybe a cyclops, could it? I mean, aren't the big three always having monster children? No, said Annabeth, it always refers to half human, half god. There's really nobody alive it could be except you. Then why don't the gods just kill me if they're desperate to keep that from happening? I don't know. That's a good question, said Annabeth. Maybe they're still trying to make their decisions altogether. Maybe they're still giving time to see what kind of hero you'll turn out to be. After all, you'd be pretty useful for their survival. But even if they could, some of them possibly might be afraid to offend your dad from killing you. But I think the real question is, what will you yourself decide when that time comes? Was there any hints left out from the prophecy? Percy asked. Before she could answer, both their attentions were caught by the sound of eagles flying over them and towards an island? It wasn't too big or too small of an island, but it was big enough to have a nice collection of buildings and a small mountain in the center. The current pushed them toward the tropical paradise up to a dock where a lady in a suit was waiting. Welcome, she said as they stepped onto the dock. Her dazzling smile made them feel like they just got off the Princess Andromeda. Then again, their boat may not have been the weirdest one in the harbor. There was a submarine and an old-fashioned sailing ship, probably replicas for tourists or something. Is this your first time with us? The lady asked. Percy and Annabeth exchanged looks. I see, the lady said. Well, I'm sure Cece will want to speak with you personally before the luau. Right this way, please. The funny thing about going on quests, Percy and Annabeth were used to running into traps. Ones in which case that at first looked like a good vacation spot and had normal-looking people. So they were expecting the lady to turn out to be a monster that would take off its disguise any minute and kill them. But they were exhausted, and their stomachs were growling when she mentioned a luau. I guess it couldn't hurt, Annabeth muttered. Of course, Percy knew it was possible. But they followed the lady anyway. Percy kept his hands in his pockets, trying to hold onto Hermes' multivitamins and Riptide, but the further they walked, and the more they saw, the more he forgot about them. The place was amazing with its white marble architecture. There was also some fountains that sprayed water into the air, forming impossible shapes like flying eagles and galloping horses. Percy remembered that Tyson loved horses. He knew he'd love to see these fountains. Percy turned around to see his expression, but then he remembered Tyson was gone. Percy, you okay? Annabeth asked. You look pale. Yeah, I'm okay, he lied. Let's keep going. Percy noticed so far all the other guests he saw were a bunch of young women relaxing on lounge chairs. The lady led them into one building, and they walked into a big white room. Percy noticed a pet cage on a table filled with guinea pigs squealing so loud they were probably hungry. But then his attention was caught by the humming sound from a lady who was sitting in a corner weaving a glistening sheet. It's beautiful, said Annabeth. The woman turned, and she was really beautiful with her black dress that matched her long hair. You appreciate weaving, my dear? The woman asked with a lovely voice. Oh, yes, ma'am, said Annabeth. My mother is... She stopped herself. Another thing about being a demigod, you couldn't just go around telling people one of your parents was one of the Olympians. And if they knew your mom were Athena, the goddess who actually invented weaving, the wrong people would try to lock you in a rubber room. You have good taste, my dear, the lady said, smiling. I'm so glad you've come. My name is Cece. They introduced themselves, but then Cece looked over at Percy with a twinge of disapproval, as if he failed a test or something. Percy felt so bad for some reason and wanted to please the lady. Oh dear, you do need my help, she said. Hella, would you take Annabeth here and show her what we have available? She'll need a fresh change of clothes, and that hair, my goodness. We'll do a full image consultation after I've spoken with this young man. But what's wrong with my hair? Annabeth asked, sounding hurt. Percy never seen her so lost for words before. Oh, don't worry, we can approve anyone here at the spa, Cece said. Hilla will show you what I mean. You, my dear, need to unlock your true self. But what about Percy? She asked. Oh, definitely, Cece said. Percy requires my personal attention. He'll need much more work than you. Normally, Percy would have gotten angry if someone spoke negatively about him, but when Cece did, he just felt sad. He realized he disappointed her and wanted to figure out how to do better. Well, said Annabeth, I guess... Right this way, dear, Hilla said, and Annabeth allowed herself to be led away, leaving Percy behind. Cece grabbed him and guided him to a mirror. You see, Percy, she said, you seriously need my help. To unlock your potential, the first step is admitting that you're not happy the way you are. Percy hated to think about his appearance. Part of him thought, who cares? But just by looking at himself in that mirror, it was hard to see any good part of himself. There, Cece said. How about we try this? She snapped her fingers. And Percy's reflection in the mirror changed. What do you see? Cece asked. Percy couldn't believe his eyes. The real him was still the same, but in the mirror stood like a cooler version of himself. He had a confident smile, clean hair, a perfect tan, wore just the right clothes, and seemed a little taller. Percy thought to himself, whoa. Do you like it? Cece asked. Or shall we try a different... No, Percy said. That's amazing. Can you really... I can promise you a full makeover, she said. So what's the catch here? Do I have to, take a special diet or something? Percy asked. Oh, it's quite easy, Cece said. She poured a red drink mix into a cup of water, and it looked like regular red punch juice when it faded. I guarantee you'll see results immediately with this. How's that possible with that? Percy asked. Why question it? She said, laughing. I mean, you do want to be perfect right away, don't you? Something nagged in Percy's mind. Why are there no guys at the spa? He asked. Oh, but there are, Cece assured him. You'll meet them quite soon. Just try the mixture and you'll see. Percy looked into the mirror at the boy that wasn't him. Now, Percy, Cece said, the hardest part of the makeover process is giving up your control. You have to decide. Do you want to trust your own judgment about what you should be, or mine? Percy's throat felt dry, and he heard himself say, Your judgment. So he took the cup and lifted it to his lips. It tasted just as it looked, like red punch. Almost immediately, a warm feeling spread through his throat. Pleasant at first, but then, 1 second later, it felt like it was burning inside him. Feeling weak, he dropped the cup and fell to the floor. And then he was gone. No, he was shrunken. He shrunk so small he got buried under his clothes. Cece pulled him out and pointed him to the mirror. He turned into a guinea pig. You see, Percy, you've unlocked your true self, she said. Lovely, aren't you? Percy screamed in horror, or more like squealed in horror. She hid his clothes under the sheet and threw him in the cage with the other rodents. Men are pigs, Percy Jackson, she said. Of course, I used to turn them into real pigs, but they were so smelly and large and difficult to keep. Guinea pigs are not so different, really, but they are much more confident and cute. There's always a class in need of a guinea pig. You'll be on your way tomorrow. Now, you can stay in that cage and behave, or I can feed you to the owls. Your roommates here might teach you some manners. Most of them have had their practice in this cage for at least 300 years. If you don't want to stay with them permanently, I suggest you... Hello, Miss Cece? Annabeth called. Cece turned around just as Annabeth walked in with an ultimate makeover. Percy almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a sleeveless white dress, and her blonde hair looked freshly washed. She looked good, really good. Percy probably would have been tongue-tied if only he could still talk. There was also something totally wrong about it. It just didn't seem like Annabeth, like she wasn't that kind of person who would try to look that glamorous. "Where's Percy?" she asked Cece. Percy tried squealing for help, but she looked like she didn't even notice. Cece smiled. "Oh, don't worry, my dear. He's just having one of our treatments. You look wonderful. How did you like the tour?" "Your library's amazing," said Annabeth. "Yes, indeed," Cece said. "The best knowledge of the past 3 millennia. Anything you want to study or want to be, it's all right there in my library." "Like an architect?" Annabeth asked. "An architect?" Cece chuckled. "My dear, like me, you have the makings of a sorceress." A sorceress?" "Oh yes, my dear," Cece said. She held up her hand and a flame appeared on her palm in the shape of a dancing figure. "My mother is Hecate, the goddess of magic," she said. "I know a daughter of Athena when I see one. You and I are not so different. We both seek knowledge and admire greatness. Neither of us need to stand in the shadow of men." I don't understand," said Annabeth. Again, Percy squealed at the top of his tiny lungs, trying to get Annabeth's attention. But she either couldn't hear him, or just didn't think the noises were important. "Stay with me," Cece said to Annabeth. "Stay here and join our staff, and soon you'll become a great sorceress and learn to bend others to your will. You shall be immortal." "But you're far too intelligent, my dear," Cece said. "You're much better than to trust that silly camp for heroes. The only way for women to have power is sorcery. Medea, Calypso, now they were powerful women. And me, of course, the greatest of them all." "What? No, you mean you're—" "Yes, my dear," she said. "I am Circe. But don't worry, I have no interest in hurting you." "What have you done with Percy?" "Oh, I only helped him realize his true form, of course." Annabeth must have finally snapped out of it, because right at that moment her attention was finally caught by the squealing from Guinea Percy. "Oh, forget about him, my dear," Circe said. "He'll be sent off to the kindergartners along with the rest. Meanwhile, you can join me and become another great sorceress. You could have all you've ever wanted." Annabeth looked in the cage and stared at Percy with a sad look. Could I just have a moment to say goodbye to him, please?" she said to Circe. "Oh, of course, my dear," Circe said. "And just so you have some privacy." She closed the door behind her, leaving Annabeth alone with a cage of rodents. "Okay, Percy," she said. "Which one's you?" Percy squealed, but all the other squealing guinea pigs just made things harder. Annabeth looked so desperate. She scanned the room until she spotted Percy's jeans sticking from under the sheet. "Yes," she said. She ran over and stuck her hand in the pockets. His pen was still in there, and the multivitamins. She was about to open the bottle, but then Circe came back with her attendants. "Well, well, well," Circe sighed. "Funny how just 1 minute passes. So, my dear, what will your answer be, then?" "This," said Annabeth. She poured the vitamins inside the cage, and bang! Percy and the other guinea pigs ate the vitamins, and they all magically changed back into humans. And somehow, with their clothes automatically put back on, so thank the Olympians, they didn't have to be seen with no clothes at all. "No!" Circe screamed. "You don't understand! Those are the worst of men!" The other men were all dressed like pirates, which was obvious. Annabeth looked at one with a long black beard that matched his leather outfit, as if he seemed familiar. "It's Edward Teach, son of Ares," she said.
"Aye, lassie," the man said. "Though most folk call me Blackbeard. Now, let's run this sorceress through once and for all."
As the pirates chased Circe out the door, Annabeth tackled Percy with a hug. "I'm so glad you're not a guinea pig," she said. Me too," Percy said. He hoped his face wasn't as red as it felt. "Come on, Seaweed Brain," she said. "Let's go while the witch is distracted." They ran out and headed back to the dock as the pirates fought the attendants. "There!" Annabeth shouted. She pointed to the sailing ship, which Percy now realized could only be Blackbeard's famous vessel, Queen Anne's Revenge. They knew the rowboat couldn't get them out of there fast enough, but a sailing ship would require a whole crew. But Percy knew what to do. After they climbed inside, he closed his eyes and concentrated on the waves rocking the ship and winds whistling in the air. They floated away from Circe's island and continued the quest, off to get the fleece, save Grover, and the rest of Camp Half-Blood. For once, Percy finally found something else he was good at besides water. As he sat down and concentrated on controlling the water, the steering wheel moved all by itself like an autopilot. Controlling Queen Anne's Revenge was like controlling a remote-control car, only with his mind. But now that they were out of danger, all Percy could think about was how much he missed Tyson and how worried he was about Grover. He also couldn't get over how badly he messed up on Circe's island. He knew if it hadn't been for Annabeth, he'd be stuck as a Ronin for who knows how long. He thought about what Circe said when it happened. "You see, Percy, you've unlocked your true self." He still felt a change, not just because he felt a big desire for lettuce, but he felt scared the same way a tiny animal would feel. What really worried him was what if that feeling had always been there? Annabeth went below deck. Might say sailing didn't agree with her. Sometime after midnight, she came back out just as they were passing a volcano island on the horizon. "That's one of the forges of Hephaestus, where he makes his metal monsters," she said. "You mean like the bronze bulls?" Percy asked. "Yes," said Annabeth. As they kept going, minutes later, the island was out of sight and long gone. "So," Percy said, "about why you hate Cyclope so much, and about how exactly Thalia died. What happened?" "Well, I guess you do deserve to know," she said, finally. "On the night when Grover was escorting us to camp, we took some wrong turns, and we were tricked into a Cyclops' lair. It seems that Cyclops had a talent for imitating voices, kind of like how Tyson did on Luke's ship. The way that Cyclops talked in my dad's voice was just creepy. We barely got out alive, Percy, and I still have nightmares about it. It's really his fault. His trap gave all those other monsters who had been chasing us before time to catch up. That's really why Thalia didn't make it. If it hadn't been for that Cyclops, she'd still be alive today." Percy thought for a moment. He thought if he were Annabeth, would he still have the courage he had to go on this quest and face another Cyclops? "Why don't you go below for a while?" she said. "You need some rest." And so he did. When he found a spot, he had another dream. He found himself back in Luke's quarters on the Princess Andromeda. It was nighttime, and that same golden coffin was still there. As he looked at it, he heard the voices of the spirits of the dead. "Beware! Traps and trickery!" Percy knew whatever evil thing was in there, he had to destroy it before it was too late. He drew Riptide, but he couldn't feel his feet for some reason. Then he heard a girl's voice behind him. "Well, Seaweed Braid, are we going to do this or what?" He turned around to find that the girl wasn't Annabeth. Instead, it was another strange girl. She wore a punk-style outfit and had messy black hair and storming blue eyes, and seemed about Percy's age. Percy knew it was impossible, but for some reason he felt like he had seen this girl before. "All right then," the girl said. "Step aside." She took out a metal bracelet, and then it expanded into a shield. The shield was designed to look like the face of Medusa, and it looked just as terrifying, like the real head was melted onto the shield. Percy wasn't sure if that was true or if the sight could kill him either way, but he didn't risk it and just looked away. The girl drew her spear and advanced on the sarcophagus. "No, wait! Stop! Wait a minute!" Percy warned. But the girl seemed to ignore him and knocked off the lid of the coffin. She gazed inside the glowing box. "No, no! It can't be! It just can't be!" she trembled. From the depths of the ocean, Kronos' laugh could be heard so loudly the whole ship trembled. The girl screamed just as the room exploded with light. "No!" Then Percy woke up with Annabeth shaking him awake. "Percy, you're having a nightmare," she said. Percy wondered what exactly was it that the girl saw in the coffin. More than that, who was she? "Get up," said Annabeth. "We've reached land." They went back up to the open deck, and their jaws dropped. Up ahead was another island. Its shape looked kind of like a giant horse saddle sliced in half. It had healthy green hills and white beaches. There was a rope bridge that reached across the chasm. Percy's nautical senses confirmed it. 30 degrees, 31 minutes north, 75 degrees, 12 minutes west. They had reached the home of Polyhemus the Cyclops. Now, most people would imagine islands where monsters live, probably with sharp rocks and bones everywhere, but this island was not like that at all. There might as well have been a sign to warn people to stay away from it. With its healthy-looking beaches and trees, it looked kind of like something out of a postcard. That was probably the fleece's doing. Maybe if they took it away from the island, it would probably fade back into something less good-looking. Percy almost felt guilty of doing that, but he had no choice. Camp Half-Blood was losing time, and Tyson would have still been with him if it hadn't been for this quest. Then they saw live sheep running around. They looked peaceful enough, but these sheep were the size of hippos. Up on the top of the hill, something glowing gold hung on a tree branch. There it was, the Golden Fleece. "This doesn't look right," Percy said. "This looks just too easy. What do we do? Just hike up there and just take it? There's no monster guarding it or anything?" It seemed like he spoke too soon, because at that moment a smaller animal trotted out of the bushes. Then the sheep rushed over to it, and the animal was lost in a sea of wool and trampling hooves. When they all moved away, there was nothing left but clean white bones where the smaller animal had stood. "They're like piranhas," said Annabeth. "Piranhas with wool," Percy said. They knew there was no easy way to get the fleece without getting eaten alive. On top of that, they had to find Grover first, if they somehow got past the Sheep of Doom, that is. Percy was too nervous to say what he was secretly hoping, that if Tyson might still be alive. They moved the ship to the backside of the island where the cliff stood up a good 200 feet. They could just hope that was the best place to keep the ship hidden. It was pretty hard to find good spots to grab hold of, and they slipped a few times, but they eventually made it to the top. "Ouch," said Annabeth. "Roar," said a deeper voice. Percy probably would have jumped if the climbing hadn't made him so tired. Annabeth pointed to the ledge, which was more narrow than they realized. It dropped off the opposite side, and right below was the entrance to a cave where the voice had come from.
"You're a tough one,"
the deep voice bellowed. "How about you just give me back my spear and I'll challenge you to a fight?" a familiar female voice argued. It was Clarice's voice. They climbed down the side and peeked in the doorway to the cave. And there he was, Polyphemus! He seemed about 15 feet high, and his single eye was milky. He wore nothing but filthy pants. Clarice was tied up and hanging upside down over a pot of boiling water. And there was Grover, still in a wedding dress, and with a veil over his head. Percy was hoping to find Tyson in there, but no such luck. The monster roared with laughter.
"Should I eat Loudmouth Girl now, or wait for wedding feast? What does my bride think?"
he asked Grover. "Oh, that's okay, dear," said Grover, trying to sound like a girl. "I'm not really hungry right now." "Did you say bride?" Clarice demanded. "You mean Grover?"
"What's a Grover?"
Polyphemus asked. "Right there, you big idiot," said Clarice. "The satyr in the wedding dress." Percy wanted to strangle her on the neck, but either way, it was too late. All they could do was watch as Polyphemus turned and ripped off Grover's wedding veil, revealing his tiny, slightly grown goat horns in his curly hair, and his manly face, of course. The Cyclops breathed heavily, trying to contain his anger.
"I thought I smelled satyr before,"
he growled.
"I don't see very well, not since that other hero stabbed me in the eye, but you're no lady, Cyclops."
"No, wait, please," Grover begged. "I have a good recipe for you."
"A recipe?"
Polyphemus asked. Yes, you don't want to eat me raw. You'll get, E. coli and all sorts of stuff. I'll taste much better grilled over a slow fire with mango chutney. You could just go get some now, and I'll just wait here quietly."
"Grilled satyr with mango chutney,"
Polyphemus mused. He looked back at Clarice.
"You satyr too?"
"No, you overgrown idiot," she complained. "I'm a girl, a daughter of Ares. Now let me out of here so I can rip your arms off and shove them down your throat."
"Girl got issues,"
Polyphemus said.
"Let me down."
Polyphemus pulled her off the rope and snatched up Grover.
"Wedding is postponed for tonight. Then we'll eat satyr for main course."
"Wait," said Grover. "You mean you're still getting married? Who's the bride?" Polyphemus looked towards Clarice. Her eyes widened. "Oh, no, no way. I am not—" Before she could finish, the Cyclops threw her and Grover into the entrance, leading deeper into the cave.
"Make yourself comfortable. I come back sundown for a big event."
As the Cyclops exited the cave, he pushed a huge boulder the size of the doorway and forced it through the frame, trapping Grover and Clarice inside.
"Mangoes,"
Polyhemus grumbled to himself.
What are mangoes?
It felt like hours just going through the trouble of moving that rock. Percy's sword wasn't any help. A magic sword could kill a lot of monsters, but did no good to help move a boulder. Annabeth tried yelling through the cracks to get a signal to Grover. But even if he could hear them, they couldn't tell. And even if they could come up with a miracle to kill the Cyclops, it still wouldn't do anything to free them. Getting the Cyclops to move that rock again was the only way to get them out. "We have no choice," said Annabeth. "We can't beat him by force, so we'll have to use trickery." "Okay, so how do we do that?" Percy asked. "I still have my baseball cap," she answered. "I can sneak past him invisibly." "Okay, so what about me?" Annabeth noticed down the hill that Polyhemus was walking past the sheep. But for some reason, they weren't attacking him. They seemed to be waiting for something, and they were. He started feeding them chunks of meat, which they didn't want to know where he got them. And some of the sheep seemed smaller, like normal sheep, and they were normal sheep. They were the only sheep that didn't take the meat. "How much do you like sheep?" Annabeth asked Percy. Now this was crazy. While Annabeth used her invisibility cap, she left Percy with this insane idea for him to hide by hanging under one of the normal sheep's belly like a baby wallaby. He just grabbed its thick wool, hooked his feet against the thigh bones, and presto. The sheep didn't seem to complain, so thank the Olympians. The underside of the sheep smells not so great, so don't get any ideas.
"Sheepies!"
The Cyclops roared.
"Here, sheepies!"
Then the sheep started trudging back up the hill. Percy heard Annabeth's voice next to him. "Okay, this is it, but don't worry, I'll be close by." He made a silent promise to the gods that if they survived this, he'd tell Annabeth she was a freaking genius. Of course, he knew the gods would hold him to it. But her plan worked out better than they expected, because as simple as that, they were in the cave. The Cyclops was about to roll the stone back into place when from somewhere outside the doorway, Annabeth shouted, "Hey, ugly!"
"Huh? Who said that?"
"Nobody!" Annabeth yelled.
"Nobody?"
Polyhemus yelled back.
"I remember you."
"You're too stupid to remember anybody, much less nobody," Annabeth taunted.
"Come here and let me kill you, nobody!"
The Cyclops howled. "You can't kill nobody, stupid oaf," Annabeth shouted. "Come and find me." The monster marched down the hill and followed her voice. Percy remembered now. Annabeth told him once that using the name Nobody was the trick another demigod named Odysseus used to trick Polyhemus when he visited the island. Right before he poked the Cyclops' eye out with a large hot stick. Annabeth figured Polyhemus would still have a grudge about that name, and she was right. He felt so angry to find his old enemy, he forgot about sealing up the cave entrance. Apparently, he didn't even stop to consider that Annabeth's voice was female, whereas the first Nobody had been male. On the other hand, he wanted to marry Grover, so he couldn't have been all that bright about the whole male-female thing. Annabeth just had to stay alive and keep him distracted long enough for him to get Grover and Clarice, and now was his chance. The back of the cave was decorated with some stone sheep statues, which Percy recognized as the work of Medusa. Also some sheepskin rug decorating the cave floor and some junk that littered the place like sheep bones and socks. Finally, he found Grover probably in the deepest part of the cave trying to help Clarice get free of her super tight ropes. "Percy?" Clarice said. "You were supposed to be blown up." "Good to see you too," he replied. "Percy!" Grover said excitingly. "You came! You heard me!" "Yeah, bud. Of course I did." "But where's Annabeth?" "Outside. Here, let me do that." He knelt down and helped them loosen the ropes. She glared at Percy, then stared at the ground and mumbled, "Thanks." "You're welcome," he said. "So, anyone else survived?" "No, just me," she answered, "surprised you made it out." Percy tried not to believe his last hope of Tyson's survival had been crushed. "All right then, come on, we better go help Annabeth." Then a scream echoed in the cave, and Percy didn't have to guess who was screaming and why. They peeked through the doorway and saw the Cyclops grinning wickedly. They were too late.
"I got nobody!"
the Cyclops shouted. He shook his fist, and a baseball cap fell to the ground, revealing Annabeth hanging upside down by her legs.
"Nasty, invisible girl," the Cyclops said. "Already got Loudmouth for her wife? Means you gotta be grilled with mango chutney."
"Okay, guys, listen," Percy whispered. "Our ship is around the back of the island. I'll rush him while you guys—" "No way," they both said at once. Clarice armed herself with a spear made out of a ram's horn and a stick. Grover picked up a sheep's thigh bone, and he held it like a club, ready to attack, though he didn't seem too happy about it. "We'll take 'em together," Clarice said with confidence. "Yeah," said Grover. Then he blinked. Did I just actually agree on her with something? "Right then," said Percy. "Attack plan, Macedonia." They all had taken the same training courses at the camp, so they knew what he was talking about. They would sneak around either side and attack the Cyclops from the sides while Percy held his attention in the front. Probably what this meant was that they'd all die instead of just Percy, but he was grateful for their help. Percy drew his sword and shouted, "Hey, Ugly! Over here!" The giant turned towards him.
"Another one? Who are you?"
"The one who insulted you."
"You are nobody?"
"Yeah, that's right. I'm nobody, and I'm proud of it. Now put her down so I can stab you in the eye again." At that moment, the good news was that he listened and dropped Annabeth. Bad news, he dropped her head first onto a rock where she laid as motionless as a rag doll. "For Pan!" Grover shouted. He threw a sheep bone which bounced harmlessly off the monster's forehead. Clarice engaged and aimed her spear for Polyhemus's foot. "Grover!" Percy shouted. "Get Annabeth to the ship!" So Grover picked up Annabeth, picked up the baseball cap, and ran out of the cave while the others kept the Cyclops distracted. Clarice was almost too brave. More brave than you'd believe, and fast. She kept dodging the Cyclops as he kept making his move again and again. Percy followed up and stabbed him wherever he could. He hoped the Cyclops would disintegrate like the others, but this one was too powerful. They knew they couldn't keep it up forever. Eventually they would become too exhausted to fight, and the Cyclops might get a lucky shot. It would only take him just one hit to kill each of them. They just had to grab the fleece, get everyone safely to the ship, and just leave the island, all without getting eaten, which still wasn't easy, but there was no way to kill the Cyclops faster. "Fall back!" he told Clarice. She rolled her eyes just as the Cyclops tried to smash her. So they ran for the exit.
"I'll cut you into sheep's tail,"
the Cyclops growled. They climbed up the side, and he was right behind them. Grover was already waiting for them on the other side of the bridge, with Annabeth laying down next to him. "Grover!" Percy shouted. "Get Annabeth's knife!" So he took out the knife, and as soon as Percy and Clarice hit solid ground, Grover started cutting the rope ladder. He cut off one side, then the other, but then... Oh no! Bam! Polyhemus made a big leap and landed right in front of them.
"Fail!" he yelled. "Nobody failed!"
Clarice and Grover tried to charge him, but they got swatted away like flies. Anger swelled up inside Percy. He couldn't believe he had gotten this far and still faced so much pain. He lost his brother, his best friend was hurt now, and now he and the others were getting their butts kicked by a one-eyed Neanderthal. Percy had it. As strength coursed through his body, he purposely forgot how hopelessly outmatched he was. Then he raised up his sword and attacked! Next thing he knew, Polyhemus was sprawled on his back, dazed and groaning, while Percy stood on top of him with the tip of his sword hovering over the monster's eye. "Whoa," Grover said. "How did you do that?" The Cyclops moaned pitifully and stared up at Percy.
No, please, not again,
he begged.
"My sheepies need me,"
he said with a tear welling down the corner of his eye.
"I just want to protect my sheep."
All Percy had to do was push his sword a few inches more and he'd win. "What are you waiting for? Do it," said Clarice. "Don't buy it, Percy," said Grover. "Cyclops can't be trusted." Percy knew Annabeth probably would have said the exact same thing. But Polyhemus was sobbing, and for the first time it sunk into Percy that he was a son of Poseidon too. "We only want the fleece," he told him. "If you let us leave with it, we won't have to kill you." The monster was still sobbing.
"My beautiful fleece, my prize of my collection. Take it and go away, you cruel human."
Percy didn't take his eyes off the monster. "One false move from you and I swear." Percy jumped off him, but then Polyhemus leaped to his feet and grabbed Percy.
"Take my fleece. I eat you first."
And then, kapow! He was knocked right in the eye with a rock. Then he dropped Percy and the Cyclops fell over the edge.
"Bad Polyphemus,"
said a familiar deep voice. Then Percy turned around and never felt so relieved and happy at the same time in his whole life. Tyson came to his rescue. It turned out that same hippocampus that Tyson called Rainbow had never really left him out of his sight. Tyson said it had been following him ever since they parted, from the Princess Andromeda to Virginia Beach to Chesapeake Bay, even when boarding the CSS Birmingham. Tyson also said that Rainbow saw him sinking when the CSS Birmingham exploded and picked him up and carried him to safety. Then he rowed him across the sea until he found the island from catching the scent of sheep. After Percy thanked him, he looked down at Annabeth. The open cut on her forehead was wider than it looked, which made Percy worried sick. "Tyson, quick, do you think you could get past those man-eating sheep and get the fleece?"
"Which one?"
he asked. "The one made of gold and hanging on that tree up on that hill over there," Percy said.
"Ooh, pretty," said Tyson. "Yes, I can get it."
Now Percy was glad more than ever to have a Cyclops at his side. Instead of attacking and eating Tyson, the sheep tried to cuddle him like he was Polyphemus. Percy couldn't imagine why. For Tyson, getting the fleece was as easy as pulling a towel off the rack. Percy knew, without his brother, they could have never gotten the fleece. If he or Annabeth or Grover or Clarice even tried to walk to it, they would not have come back. As soon as Tyson pulled the fleece off the tree branch, the leaves lost their healthy green color. When he tossed it to Percy, only then did Percy realize it had more weight on it than he imagined, maybe 60 or 70 pounds. He wrapped it around Annabeth and prayed silently to all the gods he could think of, even the ones he didn't like. Then the cut on her forehead disappeared and her beautiful gray eyes opened. She looked up and was surprised to see Grover. You're not getting married?" "Nope, my friends talked me out of it," he answered. Meanwhile, Tyson was starting to have trouble with the sheep. They kept sniffing him, just trying to look for food. Percy knew they wouldn't have the patience for long, so now it was time to leave. But there was no way they could climb back down the cliff with Annabeth still weakened, and the sheep was blocking the path. "Tyson," Percy called, "you think you could lead the flock away as far as possible? Just keep 'em away from the path long enough so we can get to the ship and you can meet us there." "Okay," Tyson said. "Come, sheepies." And they followed him down the hill. Annabeth pulled herself up, but when the fleece slipped off her back, she collapsed to the ground again. "You better keep that on you for a while," Percy said. "You're not fully healed yet." Clarice picked her up and carried her down the beach. As soon as they made it to the edge of the water, Percy concentrated on the Queen Anne's revenge. Minutes later, they saw it coming around. "It coming!" Tyson yelled. He was running down the beach with the sheep behind him, probably frustrated that they didn't get their food. "We just have to swim for the ship and we're home free," Percy said. "With Annabeth like this?" Clarice protested. "We can do it," Percy said, starting to feel confident again. Then they heard a tremendous roar and saw Polyphemus. "Swim for it!" Grover shouted. Clarice swam for the ship with Annabeth on her back. Grover followed them, while Percy waited for Tyson.
"You young Cyclops!"
The monster yelled.
"Traitor to your own kind!"
Tyson froze. "Don't listen to that, Tyson," Percy told him. "Let's go!" He pulled Tyson's arm, but Tyson just stood there as still as a mountain and stared at Polyphemus. Then he said to the monster, "Not a traitor, and you are not my kind."
"Victory or death!"
Polyphemus yelled. "Go," Tyson told Percy. "I'll hold Big Ugly." "No, he'll kill you," Percy said. Percy had already lost Tyson once. He sure wasn't going to risk losing him again. "We'll fight him together," he said.
"Together,"
Tyson agreed. Polyphemus threw a boulder at Percy, but Tyson came between them and smashed the rock to rubble. Percy willed the seawater to rise and carry him. He rowed towards the Cyclops and leaped over his head as the water blasted him backwards onto the beach.
"Destroy you, fleece stealer!"
the monster roared. "You stole the fleece," Percy yelled. "You've been using it to lure satyrs to their deaths."
"So, satyrs, good eating!"
"The fleece should be used to heal. It belongs to the children of the gods."
"Stupid human! I am a child of the gods!"
He smashed down his fists, but Percy sidestepped.
"Father Poseidon, curse this thief!"
"Poseidon won't curse me, 'cause I'm his son too," Percy said. "He won't play favorites." Percy and Tyson backed up as the Cyclops tried to grab them. He was blinking hard now, like he could barely see, and Percy realized he was targeting by the sound of his voice.
"Humans not the same,"
Polyphemus said.
"Nasty, trickery, lying!"
The two brothers locked eyes. They both knew they couldn't do it. Killing him just wasn't right. So they ran and swam for the ship and left the half-blinded Cyclops alone.
"Where are you?"
he screamed. Then he picked up a tree and threw it in the water, but luckily his aim wasn't good. At all.
"I'm gonna destroy you!"
Finally, Percy and Tyson were on the ship. "Yeah, in your face, Cyclops!" Clarice shouted. "Shut up, Clarice!" Percy told her. But it was too late. The Cyclops picked up another boulder and threw it in the direction of Clarice's voice and smashed at the ship's hull. The ship started leaning back and going down like Titanic. "Dive!" Percy shouted. Now, for whatever reason, when a ship goes down, it acts like a sinkhole, pulling in everything around it. Yeah, it sucks. As the children of the sea god, Percy and Tyson would be okay without a doubt, but their friends were struggling to reach the surface. They both knew pulling them up wouldn't be that easy, especially with the debris everywhere swirling around them. What now? We need help, Percy thought to himself. Yes, said Tyson's voice inside Percy's head. Percy looked towards him and almost forgot he was also a son of Poseidon. They could communicate with each other. Rainbow, Tyson said. Then Percy closed his eyes and in his mind he shouted, Rainbow, we need you. Immediately, 3 horses with fishtails galloped upward faster than dolphins. The demigods burst back up to the surface. Grover, Annabeth, and Clarice were each hanging on the back of a hippocampus. Rainbow, who was carrying Clarice, allowed Tyson to hop on. The one who carried Annabeth allowed Percy to do the same. Then all 3 hippocampi raced away from the island and far across the sea.
I did it! Polyhema shouted. I finally sank nobody!
Percy sure hoped the Cyclops never found out he was wrong. As he tried to keep Annabeth from slipping off the horse, he prayed silently and thanked the gods. And thank the gods, Annabeth still had the fleece wrapped around her. She most thankfully wasn't knocked out, just in deep sleep after all that exhausting commotion. And before Percy knew it, he fell asleep too. Percy woke up with salt water splashing at his face. Percy, wake up, Annabeth said. They were still on the horses and now floating in front of a city skyline. I think we're in Miami, Annabeth said. The hippocampi sniffed the water and didn't try to move any further. I think this is as far as they'll go, Percy realized. Too many people. And pollution. So they all slid off the hippocampi and swam for the shore. Tyson was teary-eyed, but he thanked Rainbow and gave him one last hug before saying goodbye. Finally, they were back in the mortal world. As soon as they got up to the boardwalk, the mist transformed Tyson's face to look human again. Grover put on his cap in case any mortals noticed the goat horns. With the fleece still wrapped around Annabeth, the mist also disguised it to look like a red towel. Then she ran to the nearest newspaper box to find the date. She cursed in ancient Greek when she saw that it was the 18th of June. We've been away from camp for 10 days, she said. What? That's impossible, Clarice said. But Percy knew that time flowed differently in places outside the mortal world. Dahlia's tree must almost be completely dead, Grover said. We have to get the fleece back tonight. How can we do that with no ride or money, and it's on the opposite end of the country, Clarice complained. This is just like the Oracle said. It's all your fault, Jackson. If you hadn't... Wait a minute, Percy said. What do you mean like how the Oracle said? What exactly did the Oracle say? Tell me. She looked like she was going to tell him off, but instead she took a deep breath and recited her prophecy. You shall sail the iron ship with warriors of bone. You shall find what you seek and make it your own. But despair for your life entombed within stone, and fail without friends to fly home alone. Ouch, said Grover. Well, we still need a way of finding some cash, Percy said.
Cash? Like the green paper in our bags?
Tyson asked. Well, yeah, Percy said, but we lost those bags days ago. Percy's jaw dropped when he saw. Tyson pulled out the same mortal money Hermes gave them. There were at least $300. Tyson, how did you...
I thought it was food for Rainbow, he said. I found it floating in the sea. But there was only the green paper. Sorry.
Then Percy spotted a taxi at the curb, letting out a family of passengers. Then he took half the amount of cash, then took the towel fleece from Annabeth and gave them both to Clarice. Go on, he told her. You have to get to the airport. She hesitated. You'd let me? It's your quest, Percy said. There's only enough for one flight. Besides, I can't travel by air. Zeus would blast me into a million pieces. That's what the prophecy meant. You'd fail without friends, meaning you need our help, but you have to fly home alone. You have to get the fleece back safely on your own. Clarice tried to decide if he meant his every word and if it wasn't a trick. Then she smiled and grabbed the money and fleece and ran for the cab. You can count on me, she said as she climbed into the car. I won't fail. Not failing would be good, Percy replied. Then the cab drove down the road and the fleece was on its way. Percy, Annabeth said, that was so generous, Grover offered. Insane, Annabeth corrected. You're betting the lies on everybody at camp that Clarice will get the fleece back safely by tonight? It's her quest, he said. She deserves a chance.
Percy's nice,
Tyson said. Too nice, said Annabeth. Percy couldn't help but think that just maybe she was secretly a little impressed. Come on, he told his friends. Let's find another way home. That's when he turned and found a sword pointing at his throat.
Hey, cuz. Welcome back to the States.
Luke and his bareheaded friends appeared on either side of them. Argreus and Aureus grabbed Annabeth and Grover tight, but Tyson knocked them down hard and rustled them to the ground. Percy, Luke said, why don't you tell your ugly friend to back down unless he wants both your friends' heads smashed together? What do you want, Luke? Percy growled. Luke gestured towards the nearby dock, and in that direction was the Princess Andromeda. I simply want to extend my hospitality, of course, Luke said. The heroes were forced aboard the Princess Andromeda and were thrown down on the open deck in front of a swimming pool where Luke's disordered goons surrounded them. Laestrygonians, armed demigods, and other creeps had all gathered to watch the heroes get some hospitality.
Now the fleece, Luke said. Where is it?
Not here where you could take it from us, Percy said. Though he thought telling him anything at all might be bad, but saying the truth to Luke's face felt good. It's already on its way to fix up your mess. Luke's eyes narrowed.
You're lying.
There's no way you could have... Wait a minute. You mean... You get...
Clarice?
Yeah, that's right, Percy said.
Argreus!
Luke growled.
Go get me my steed. I have to get to the Miami airport.
When the bear man left the deck, Luke started gripping his sword so tight while pacing around the deck and cursing in ancient Greek. The rest of his crew looked uneasy. Maybe they'd never seen their boss look so unhinged before. Percy started thinking if he could use Luke's anger and get him to talk, maybe everybody could hear how crazy his plans were and possibly turn them against him. Then Percy looked at the swimming pool. Its fountain shot lines of water up and down and that left sprays of mist hanging in the air, creating a rainbow in the daylight, and then suddenly Percy had an idea. This was your plan all along, he said to Luke. You set us up. You let us go and tricked us into bringing you the fleece just to save you the trouble of getting it yourself.
Of course I did, you idiot,
Luke said. You're a traitor, Percy said. Then he pulled out his last drachma and threw it past Luke, and it disappeared through the rainbow-colored mist. With all his heart, hoping his prayer would be accepted in silence, Percy concentrated on who he wanted to see, and said in his mind, Oh, dear goddess, please accept my offering. Then he looked back at Luke and pulled out his sword and yelled, You tricked us all, the whole camp, even Mr. D.
This is not the best time for heroics, Percy, Luke said. Now why don't you put that puny little sword of yours away before I change my mind?
Whose idea was it exactly to poison the tree? Percy demanded.
I told you, me, Luke said. I just used elderly python venom straight from the depths of Tartarus.
So Chiron had nothing to do with it?
Of course not. As if that old fool would even have the guts to ever do that.
You call betraying your friends and endangering the whole camp having guts?
You don't understand the half of it. I was going to let you take the fleece once I was done with it.
That made Percy hesitate. Why would Luke let him take the fleece? He must have been lying, but Percy couldn't afford to lose his attention. You were going to heal Kronos, weren't you? He said.
Well, duh, of course I was, Luke answered. If it's magic can fix the whole landscape, then surely it can restore a Titan Lord to its old self again. But you never really stopped us, Percy. You've only slowed us down a little.
So you poisoned the tree, betrayed Thalia, and set us all up just to help Kronos destroy the gods?
Luke gritted his teeth. If you already know, why keep asking me?
Percy smiled. To make sure the audience in the back heard you. He pointed to the pool, and Luke gasped when he saw an iris message revealing Dionysus, Tantalus, and the rest of the campers in the dining tables. They sat and watched the whole thing in stunned silence. Well, it looks like we have received some unplanned dinner entertainment here tonight, said Mr. D. Mr. D, you heard him, right? About Chiron not being the one who poisoned the tree? Percy asked. Yes, I suppose he did not, Mr. D sighed. The image could be a trick, said Tantalus, though most of his attention was on his cheeseburger, which he tried to corner with both hands, but it just kept automatically moving away. I fear not, said Mr. D, looking at Tantalus with distaste. It appears I shall have to reinstate Chiron as activities director. And I suppose I do miss the old horse's pinochle games. Tantalus grabbed his cheeseburger, and it didn't pull away from him. He stared in amazement while holding it up. I got it, he cackled. I believe we are no longer in need of your services, Tantalus, said Mr. D. You are now dismissed from camp, and you may return to the underworld. What? No! Tantalus said. No! He disappeared, and his burger dropped right back on the plate. Tantalus was gone. The campers cheered. The deed was done. Luke bellowed with rage. He slashed his sword at the iris message right as it dissolved. Percy felt pretty good about himself, at least until Luke turned and gave him a murderous look.
You'll never leave this boat alive, Luke said.
If you want me dead, why don't you do it yourself, like last time? Percy asked.
Kronos was right about you, Percy, Luke growled. You're an unreliable weapon, and you need to be replaced.
Just then, they were interrupted by the sound of a screeching Pegasus that Argyrius pulled onto the deck. Just looking at it kind of felt scary, but at the same time, it was beautiful. It was the very first pure black Pegasus Percy had ever seen, with its black feathered wings like the wings of a giant raven. It whinnied in pain, and Percy understood its thoughts. It called Luke and his followers names so bad, Chiron probably would have washed its mouth out.
Your steed is ready, sir,
said Argyrius. Luke kept his eyes on Percy.
You can't beat me in a fight, Jackson, he said.
And you keep avoiding one. Are you scared to let your friends see you get whipped? Luke glanced at his men, and now Percy had him trapped. Luke knew if he had backed down now, he would look weak. Percy knew it was the perfect distraction to buy Clarice some time, and hopefully it would give his friends a chance to escape. If anybody could think of a plan to get them out of there, Annabeth could. On the downside, Percy knew how good Luke was at sword fighting.
I'll kill you quickly,
Luke decided. He whistled to one of his men, who threw him a shield. Luke, said Annabeth, at least make it even and let him have a shield.
Sorry, you bring your own,
he said. A shield was another one of Percy's problems. Fighting two-handed with just a sword gives you more power, but fighting one-handed with a shield gives you better defense and versatility. There are more moves, and more options, and more ways to kill. Percy thought back when Chiron told him to stay at camp no matter what and continue his training. Now, he was going to regret not listening to him. Luke charged and almost killed Percy on the first try. He backed out of the way in time and raised Riptide, but Luke slammed the blade away with his shield.
My, Percy, Luke chided. You're out of practice.
He came at Percy again with a swipe to the head, but Percy dodged right on time. Then Luke came behind Percy easily and gave him a cut at the back of his ankle. The pain was so intense Percy collapsed. He couldn't get up, and he started to crawl backwards away from Luke. Luke advanced on him slowly, with Percy's blood on his sword.
Here's one thing I want you to watch before you die, he said.
He looked towards Aureus as he held up Grover and Annabeth.
You can have your dinner now, Aureus, Luke said. Bon appetit.
The bear man lifted Percy's friends and opened his mouth impossibly wide, and right at that moment was when all Hades broke loose. An arrow whooshed into Aureus' mouth and he stumbled backwards. Then the Pegasus rose up and knocked his brother in the head and flew away free. The bear twins' bodies dissolved into smoke. Then all everybody could hear was the roar of a million hooves stomping metal. A group of centaurs charged onto the deck, and Percy recognized one of them. It was Chiron. Thank the Olympians. He did say he was visiting his relatives, but if these centaurs were them, none of them looked anything like him at all. Only some had white horse fur like him, while others had black fur or brown or gray. Some of them wore coats, while others wore shirts that said, "Party Ponies." Some carried bows or baseball bats. Some even carried paintball guns. Even Luke was stunned. As he raised his sword, one centaur shot a custom-made arrow with a boxing glove arrow in the front. It smacked Luke in the face and sent him crashing into the swimming pool.
Come and get some,
one of the centaurs shouted. All of Luke's followers skedaddled as the centaurs fired their paintballs. Who could blame him? Chiron may be the only civilized centaur in the world, while every other one would choose to act pretty wildly. Chiron galloped over to Annabeth and Grover, and they jumped onto his back. Luke stuck his head out of the pool.
"You'll never get away with this,"
he shouted. But then he got knocked in the head with a boxing glove arrow. Again. Another centaur walked over to Percy and said, "Dude, get your big friend and let's go." "Tyson," Percy shouted, "it's time to leave." Tyson finished his own fight and went over to join Percy on the centaur's back.
"Whoa,"
said the centaur, trying to keep himself up.
"Dude, does low diet mean anything to you?"
Then they followed the other centaurs to the edge of the deck and fearlessly jumped over the edge as if it were a steeplechase and not 10 stories above the ground. Most fortunately, not dying from the fall, the centaurs hit the asphalt as if it were just a few feet down. Then they started galloping down the road and carried the demigods to safety. They were running at the speed of light and sound, and next thing they knew, they left the city in just seconds. The heroes were safe and now heading home. Seconds later, they found themselves in a trailer park in a forest somewhere outside the city. In other words, a field of horse trailers. They were in a centaur camp. The demigods jumped off the centaurs' backs, and Percy looked at Chiron. Chiron, you saved us, he said, still feeling stunned that he was actually here with them. Well, I couldn't very well let you die, especially since you cleared my name, Chiron said. But how did you find out so fast? How did you even know where we were? Asked Annabeth. Well, I'm not sure if you heard me well the last time we talked through that last Iris message. But I did say I would keep watch to see if anything strange would come up there at Miami, as most strange things tend to do. Also, Iris and I have been friends for centuries, and I asked her to alert me to any important communications in this area. In which case, the Iris message you used to reveal the truth about the tree. It wasn't any trouble at all to get my cousins here to help. As you can see, centaurs can travel quite fast when we wish to. Distance for us is not the same as humans. So what now? Percy asked. Luke's got Kronos' remains in that coffin on that cruise ship back there. Do we just let him go? I'm afraid this fight is just going to have to be put to a draw, Percy, he answered. We did not have the strength in numbers. Luke was not organized enough to pursue us. Nobody won. But we got the fleece, said Annabeth. Clarice is already on her way, flying back to camp with it right now. You're all true heroes, Chiron said. For now, we must return to Camp Half-Blood. I must have some words with Mr. D when we get there. There's the rest of the summer to plan and so much training to do. Also, I am curious about the fleece myself. Hearing that made Percy worry about what Luke had said. I was going to let you take the fleece once I was done with it, Luke had said. Could Luke have lied about that? Percy learned with Kronos there was usually a plan within a plan. The Titan Lord wasn't the Olympian's evil father for nothing. He always had ways of getting people to do what he wanted without ever realizing his true intentions. That's how Ares ended up crossing the line last year with the lightning bolt problem. Percy, Chiron said, I had a talk with Annabeth on the way here about the prophecy. Uh-oh, Percy thought. It wasn't her fault, he told Chiron. I made her tell me. Well, I suppose I cannot expect to keep it a secret forever, Chiron said. So am I the one in the prophecy? Percy asked. I wish I knew, Percy, Chiron said. You are not 16 yet, but for now we must simply train you as best we can and leave the future to the fates. So that's what it meant, Percy said, last summer with the omen from the fates. When I saw them snip somebody's life string, I thought it meant I was going to die right away, but it's worse than that. It's got something to do with that prophecy. The depth they foretold. It's going to happen when I'm 16. Percy, my boy, you can't be sure about that, Chiron said. We're not even all sure if the prophecy is really talking about you. But there's no other living child of the big three but me, Percy said. That we know of, Chiron said, and Kronos is rising. And he's going to try to destroy Olympus, Percy said. He will try, Chiron agreed, and Western civilization along with it, if we don't stop him. And we will stop him, and you will not be alone in that fight, Percy. But I'm just a kid. How am I any good against a Titan Lord? Percy asked. You must try, Percy, Chiron told him, especially after today. Because whether or not you are the child in the prophecy, Kronos thinks you might be. He will finally despair of turning you to his side. That is the only reason he hasn't killed you yet, you know. As soon as he's sure he can't use you, he will destroy you. You sound like you know him, said Percy. I do know him, Chiron said. Percy kept forgetting how old Chiron was. He'd been training heroes practically since the beginning. Is that why Mr. D blamed you for the tree? Why you said some people don't trust you? Percy asked. Why would anyone think that after all you've done before for so many heroes? Because of my connection to the Titan Lord, Percy, he said. Remember your training, Percy, and remember your study of mythology. Percy tried to think, but honestly, studying wasn't his thing. Not even mythology. Then he just guessed. You owe him a favor? He spared your life or something? No, Percy, Chiron said. Kronos is my father. As soon as they made it back to Camp Half-Blood, Clarice hung the fleece onto the tree. Then a cold breeze rustled the entire camp right up to the beach. And the moonlight had grown brighter above the camp. The tree's leaves had turned from yellow back to healthy green. Everyone cheered. They saved the camp. The tree did get its power back to protect the camp, but Chiron ordered a 24/7 guard duty on the hill, at least until they could find a monster they could trust to protect the fleece. Seconds later, Clarice's campmates carried her around the camp while wearing a laurel wreath to honor and celebrate her victory. No one gave Percy and his friends any second looks, as if they never even helped her out at all. It seemed that that was the best thanks they could expect, because if they admitted they had snuck out of camp to do the quest, they'd have to expel them. And Percy honestly had quite enough attention for one really exhausting week, and it felt good just to be one of the campers for once. As they celebrated around the campfire, Clarice came over and nudged Percy from behind and whispered in his ear. Just because you were cool once, Jackson, don't think you're off the hook with Ares, she whispered. I'm still waiting for the right opportunity to pulverize you. Percy grinned. Later, it was announced that the chariot races were surprisingly going to continue the next morning, even though Tantalus was gone. It felt right more than ever with Chiron back. After the first experience, Tyson lost his interest and decided to work as Percy's pit crew. And more surprisingly, Percy and Annabeth decided to team up. He would drive, she would defend. Before going to bed, Percy gave the horses some brushing when a voice behind him said, Fine animals, horses are. I wish I thought of them. It was Hermes, only his hair was black instead of salt and pepper, and he was dressed like a mailman with a bag over his shoulder. Percy apologized about Luke and mentioned the part about Luke saying that he thought Hermes abandoned him. Then Hermes said, Percy, have you ever felt like your father abandoned you? Then Percy thought about all the attention he had gotten from all the accomplishment and wished his dad would say something for once. Then Hermes said, You know, the hardest thing about being a god is that you must often act indirectly, especially when it comes to your own children. If we were to intervene every time our children had a problem, that would only create more problems and more resentment. But I believe if you give it some thought, you'll see that your father has been paying attention to you, and he has answered your prayers. I can only hope that someday Luke may realize the same with me. Whether you feel like you succeeded or not, you spoke to Luke and reminded him who he was. I tried to kill him, Percy said. Families are messy, Hermes said. Immortal families are eternally messy. Sometimes the best we can do is remind each other that we're related, for better or worse, and try to keep the killing to a minimum. It didn't sound like the best recipe for the perfect family, but then again, as Percy looked back at what he'd been through on the quest, he realized maybe Hermes was right. Poseidon had sent the hippocampi to help. He'd given Percy the powers over the sea he'd never known before. And then there was Tyson. Would they have ever met if Poseidon or anyone had wanted them to? How many times did Tyson save Percy's life during the summer? Oh, and before I go, I have a letter for you, Hermes said. And if you could sign this, please? He took Hermes' pen and was a little startled when he noticed George and Martha hanging on it in their small forms.
Hey, Percy, did you get me a rat?
Asked George. No, you can't find those at sea, Percy said.
How about some guinea pigs?
Percy signed quickly and handed Hermes back the pen, and Percy took a small sea blue envelope. Somehow he knew right away it was from his father.
Don't get too nervous when you read it, dear, said Martha. He does have your interests at heart.
Good luck tomorrow, by the way, Hermes said, though you'll have to excuse me if I root for Team Hermes. Goodbye, Percy. For now. Then he put on his pith helmet, and little white rings sprouted out. He hovered over the ground and began to glow. Percy looked away, and the messenger god disappeared into a flash of light. The letter was addressed in strong but elegant handwriting. Percy Jackson, care of Camp Half-Blood, Farm Road, 3.141, Long Island, New York, 11954. Percy still couldn't believe it was actually from his father. There were so many things he hoped it would say, like maybe it would tell him he did a good job getting the fleece, or maybe it would explain about Tyson, or apologize for not talking sooner. But when he opened it, he saw that there were only two simple words printed on the page. Brace yourself. Then he remembered what Martha said about being nervous. That let Percy know something was expected to happen and would knock him off his feet unless he was prepared. The next morning, Percy helped prepare their brand new white and gold chariot. Tyson made Percy and Annabeth each a javelin. Then Tyson gave Percy an extra tool. A wristwatch? It looked like any normal white and silver watch with a black leather strap.
If you need protection in race, hit the button,
Tyson told him. Percy didn't see how keeping time would help, but he couldn't say no to Tyson.
Didn't finish in time for trip. Sorry,
Tyson mumbled. Percy usually didn't like wearing watches. He thought, who cares about what time it was? But when he put it on, it was surprisingly light and comfortable. So comfortable, Percy thought he might forget he was wearing it. Then he realized it was what he'd seen Tyson tinkering on all summer, including during the quest. Percy also felt really touched that Tyson was concerned. Thanks, man, he said. He promised Tyson he'd remember the watch. Then he tried to apologize for getting embarrassed about him before and telling him everyone he wasn't his real brother, but it wasn't easy to find the best words.
I know what you will tell me,
Tyson said, looking ashamed.
Poseidon did care for me after all. He sent you to help me, just what I asked for.
You asked Poseidon for me? Percy asked.
I asked for a friend. Young Cyclopes grow up all alone on the streets, learn to make things with scrap and survive.
Yeah, but still, that's just so cruel, Percy said.
Makes us appreciate blessings and not be greedy and mean and fat like Polyphemus. But I was still scared when the monsters tried to chase me, so I prayed to Daddy for help, and soon the Merryweather people found me. And then I met you. Best blessing ever. Sorry I said Poseidon was mean. He sent me a brother.
Percy, come on, Annabeth called. The race is starting.
Go, Tyson said. You will win.
Okay, thanks, big guy. We'll win this one for you. Chiron blew the horn, and the chariot zoomed away and disappeared into the woods. Within seconds, Percy and Annabeth had already passed the Ares and Hermes chariot. When they had one last lap to go, they were neck to neck with the Hephaestus chariot. Beckendorf threw a small pouch into their chariot. Instantly, green smoke sprayed from out of the pouch. "It's Greek fire!" Annabeth shouted. "You can't put it out with water or a fire extinguisher." They should have known. Just because Beckendorf was one of the more nicer campers didn't mean he'd cut them slack in the camp games. Then Percy remembered the watch. He still didn't know how it could help him, but he hit the button, and instantly the watch changed. It opened up and expanded into a 4-foot wide shield. Tyson had definitely come through. Percy raised his shield, and Beckendorf's blade shattered on impact. "What the—" He didn't get to finish because Percy knocked him in the head and he fell out of his chariot. Percy threw the Greek fire pouch out of the chariot just in time before it exploded. They crossed the finish line and won first place. Their friends started chanting their names, but Annabeth shouted over the noise and got their attention. "Wait, stop! It wasn't just us," she shouted. "We couldn't have won without someone else. We couldn't have won this race, or survived the quest, or get the fleece, or saved Grover, or anything. We owe our lives to Tyson. Percy's, brother," Percy said. "Tyson, my baby brother." Tyson smiled and blushed. Then Annabeth surprisingly planted a kiss on Percy's cheek. Then the campers picked up Percy and Annabeth and tried to lift Tyson and carried them to the winner's platform where Chiron was waiting to bestow them laurel wreaths. That day had to be one of the happiest ones Percy had ever spent at camp, which may go to show you never know when your world is about to rock to pieces. Later, Grover said that he was awarded the rest of the summer off before resuming his quest for Pan. He said his bosses never felt so impressed to see a satyr make it off of Polyhemus's island alive and with the fleece. Then he told Percy he could dissolve the empathy link between them now that they were face to face. But Percy told him he liked to keep it if that was okay with him. "But Percy, it's dangerous," Grover said. "If I ever get killed, you could die along with me." "If you ever get kidnapped again, I want to know about it, and I'll come and rescue you again," said Percy. "I wouldn't have it any other way, G-Man." In the end, he agreed not to break the link and went back to playing his new reed pipes his bosses awarded him with. He seemed out of practice. Later, Chiron told Percy he had fixed the problem with Merryweather Prep. Chiron said he could manipulate the mist, and he made everyone think it was just a furnace explosion that was not Percy's fault. He also told Percy he could teach him how to manipulate the mist himself one day when he was ready. "So, I can go back next year?" Percy asked. "Oh no, you're still expelled," said Chiron. "Your headmaster, Mr. Bonsai, said you had, how did he put it, ungroovy karma that disrupted the school's educational aura. But you're not in any legal trouble, which was a relief for your mother. And speaking of your mother..." He pulled out his cell phone and handed it to Percy. "It's high time you called her," he said. The worst part was the beginning, which were the, "Percy Jackson, what were you thinking of sneaking off to camp without permission and going on dangerous quests? Do you have any idea how much you scare me half to death?" parts he stood through hearing. But finally, she paused to catch her breath. "Oh, I'm just so glad you're safe." That's the great thing about his mom. It wasn't in her nature to stay mad. She already knew the consequences of being the mother of a demigod. She would have known from meeting his dad. Then he apologized to her and said goodbye. He knew they would just find another school for him, like always. As for Tyson, the campers treated him like a hero. Percy would have been happy to have him as a cabin mate forever, but later that day, Percy met him at the beach, and he told Percy something real shocking.
Dream came from Daddy last night, he said. He wants me to visit.
Percy wondered if he was kidding, but Tyson didn't really know how to make jokes. Poseidon sent you a dream message? He asked Tyson.
Yes, he wants me to go underwater for the rest of the summer, learn to work at Cyclops forges. He called it an intern term.
An internship? Percy asked.
Yes.
Percy had to admit he did feel a little jealous. Poseidon had never invited him underwater, and he thought Tyson was going just like that. So, when do you leave? He asked.
Right now,
Tyson said. Oh, well, I'm happy for you, big guy. Really, Percy said.
Hard to leave my new brother,
Tyson said.
but I want to make things, weapons for the camp. You will need them.
Unfortunately, Percy knew he was right. The fleece had only restored their protection at camp and not solved all their problems. Luke was still out there, building an army. Kronos was still reforming, and eventually they would need all the weapons they could get. I know you'll make the best weapons ever, he told Tyson, and I'll bet they'll tell good time, too. Tyson sniffled.
Brothers help each other.
You are my brother, Percy told him, no doubt about it. Then Tyson gave him a super tight hug and felt a little teary-eyed, and Percy almost felt it too.
Use the shield well,
He said. I will, big guy, Percy told him.
Save your life someday,
Tyson said. The way he said it in such a so-matter-of-fact type of way, Percy wondered if that one eye of his could see into the future. Tyson headed down the dock and whistled. Rainbow, the hippocampus, popped out of the surface. Percy watched the two of them ride off together into the realm of Poseidon once more. Percy couldn't help feeling sad. He knew Tyson would have an awesome time under the ocean, but he would still miss everything about him. His fascination with horses, the way he could fix things or tie bad guys into knots, he would even miss Tyson snoring like an earthquake in the middle of the night. Hey Percy, Annabeth called, it's time for dinner. So he led them back to the Poseidon table, and all three of them enjoyed their dinner together just like old times. Thanks to the Golden Fleece's powers to restore the magical borders, everyone managed to sleep through the night. Percy had another dream that night. He saw Tyson in front of him and gestured him to follow him through an underwater court. He followed him into a throne room, and in the middle of the room sat his father, Poseidon. He was just the same as Percy first saw him a year ago, with his tan skin, black messy hair and beard, and sea-green eyes just like his own. He was dressed in that same Hawaiian shirt and beige pants from before. As he held up his trident, Percy listened as he said two simple words. Brace yourself. Then Percy woke up with the sound of banging at his cabin door. Grover flew in without even waiting for permission. Percy, he said, Annabeth, on the hill, she's... He was so stunned and so out of breath, but the look in his eyes told Percy something was seriously wrong. She's lying there, just lying there, he told Percy. After getting some clothes on, Percy followed Grover, and they raced to the hill where a crowd had gathered in front of the tree. Something big had happened.
Curse the Titan Lord,
Chiron said.
He's tricked us again, giving himself another chance to control that prophecy.
What do you mean? Percy asked.
The fleece has worked too well,
Chiron said. It healed the tree and did a little more than that. Percy looked over at the tree. It looked perfectly healthy and the fleece was still there. But below the tree, next to Annabeth, was a girl lying unconscious. She had black hair and a punk-style outfit. Percy knelt down right next to the girl and put his hand on her forehead. Just from that one touch, Percy knew somehow whether or not she was a camper, she was in fact a half-blood. He tried to sit her up. "She needs nectar," he said. But everyone stayed back and still in shock. No one, not even Chiron, had moved. "Come on," Percy yelled. "What are you waiting for? Help me!" Then the girl coughed and opened her electric blue eyes. "Who?" the girl said, with a wild-eyed look. "It's okay. You're safe now," Percy said. "Strangest dream. Dying," she said. "No, you're okay. My name's Percy. What's your name?" That's when it hit him. He knew her answer before she even said it. From that point, Percy knew what the whole quest was about, and what Chiron meant about Kronos having a chance to control the prophecy. Kronos had tricked them. He planned the entire thing. The girl Percy was holding would be destined to either become his best friend or his biggest enemy. "I'm Thalia," she mumbled, "daughter of Zeus."